Let me tell you a story. Rosie and Dennis meet at a bar for a blind date. It's immediately about as awkward as a blind date tends to be. Their conversation is a bit stilted and heavily reliant on small talk. Rosie says that she can't remember the last time she was on a date and that she's forgotten how to talk. She says her last relationship was pretty awful, and then doubles back on that statement, saying that the relationship just became unbearable at a certain point. Rosie seems to regret bringing this up and tries to ask Dennis about himself, but he too seems reluctant and says he feels like he's already blown the date. This really irks Rosie. Dennis's insecurity and Rosie's annoyance quickly shifts the atmosphere from awkward to tense. Dennis says he hoped this would feel organic or natural, which Rosie refutes, saying, "How does one act naturally? Am I being natural?" She's behaving pretty antagonistically to this guy that she just met. When Dennis goes to get Rosie and himself a drink, she stays at the booth and mumbles to herself, doubting this whole date and wanting to leave. When Dennis returns, they talk about the trust it takes to go on a blind date. He emphasizes that they don't know each other. Rosie says, "But I can trust that you're being honest with me." Dennis replies, "No problem there. I pride myself in my honesty." And Rosie says, "You think what we're doing here is honest?" Dennis tries to skirt or joke his way out of this, but Rosie asks him if they can stop, saying that this is embarrassing. Dennis plays dumb for a moment. Rosie says, "It's not working, just talk to me." Dennis relents. Rosie asks him how his day was. Dennis recounts the day, mentioning that he picked up Rosie's prescription earlier, because the truth is, Rosie and Dennis have been together for 4 years, and as Rosie bluntly puts it, their marriage is not working. They tried to roleplay a blind date together, maybe recreating the first time they met or imagining a whole different scenario, but Rosie couldn't go through with it, whereas Dennis is still hopeful to try. When Dennis is clearly bothered by their failed roleplay, Rosie asks him in frustration, "What do you think this is?" "I'll tell you what this is. This is Acting Class." Acting Class is a graphic novel by Drnaso, created largely during the US's COVID lockdown and published in 2022. The title explains the premise well enough. A group of people take up an acting class for various reasons, and both in and outside of the class, the borders of reality begin to blur. Acting Class is not literally gruesome or violent, but it is one of the most disturbing graphic novels, or just novels, that I've ever read. Honestly, the only reason that I'm saying one of is because Drnaso has 2 other graphic novels that are up there for me, especially Sabrina, which was the first graphic novel nominated for the Man Booker Prize a few years ago. So if I put disturbing in the title of this video, it's technically not just me trying to play the YouTube algorithm. Acting Class is, to me, peak psychological horror. It is subtle and clever and will stick with you long after you finish reading it. The whole reason I'm making this video is because this book has been haunting me since I read it in one sitting last Christmas, and now it needs to haunt you too. I would implore you to read Acting Class. I'm going to be spoiling the whole plot of this video for the purpose of analysis, but even if you watch the whole thing, I won't be able to exactly recreate the feeling of reading this comic, and for that I am glad, because that's not what I'm trying to do here. I also get that graphic novels are expensive, so maybe go to your local library and see if they're unhinged enough to have this in there. Or if you know me personally, you can borrow my copy. One final disclaimer, I'm going to list some content warnings for Acting Class and for what I cover in this video. I trust you to know your own limits with this stuff, but just know it gets kind of intense. Content warnings. Unreality and delusion, cults, manipulation, gaslighting, and mental illness, including severe anxiety, disassociation, and psychosis, are all overarching themes of Acting Class. With some characters, I'll also be discussing animal abuse, alcoholism, police brutality and corruption, suicidal ideation, and implied child sexual abuse. I'll warn you when these subjects come up so you can skip ahead to the next chapter if you feel the need to. Before we talk about characters though, I have to answer a question that I've heard people pose when they first see Acting Class, and a question I had too when I came across Nick Drnaso's work for the first time. Why does it look like that? If you've ever been on an airplane, you might be familiar with the safety instructions they have on the back of the seats for you to stare at. I'm specifically thinking of the Rayanne ones where they depict babies the same way they did in medieval artwork, like little men with bowl cuts. When I first encountered Nick Drnaso's work on some website years ago reviewing his graphic novel Beverly, I immediately thought that his art looked like Ryanair airplane safety manuals. Neat and simple with flat colouring and indistinguishable but kind of unnerving character design. I've tried to make a few people read Drnaso's work, specifically artists, because I'm surrounded by artists, and they've mostly found the art off-putting, sometimes to the point of not finishing the book. I hate to say what I'm about to say, but the art is weird and uncanny and not beautiful, and that is the point. That doesn't mean you have to like it, but let me explain. I think some people might think that because Drnaso's work looks like this, that he's a bad artist. Wrong. I'm not an expert in art, but I have been drawing since I was tiny, and I adore graphic novels, and I can say I know a bit about how they work. I even had a webcomic for a few years, so for whatever authority I have, I think Drnaso is an incredibly skilled visual artist. He has a great grasp on anatomy, perspective, character design, and landscapes. I actually think the settings in acting class can be very beautiful when they're supposed to be. I'd venture to guess that he could draw in many styles. The question is, why does he draw like this for his graphic novels, specifically acting class? There's a kind of simple answer, and that's because it's perfect for the story. Because of the flat colours and simplistic style, it's sometimes hard to tell what the characters in acting class are thinking. It leaves a lot to the reader to figure out because you can never be completely sure unless they tell you, and even then they might be lying. It really adds to the terror in the experience of reading this novel. It's also a bit hard to tell some of the characters apart. There were several times where I had to focus to make sure I knew who I was looking at, especially around the start. The aforementioned Rosie and Dennis are maybe the worst offenders of this, but it's not a case of an artist's same face syndrome. The structure of the characters' faces are quite different when you look closely. Rosie and her husband have different noses, eye shapes, face shapes. Their similarity is more to do with the way they dress, their haircuts, and even their expressions sometimes. I think that's to do with them being a married couple who are losing their identities in their relationship, which is one of the problems they deal with throughout the story. Drnaso's work is off-putting. It's subtly crafted to feel incredibly sinister. He achieves this through pacing, dialogue, the lack of written sound effects, which creates a constant eerie silence in your own head as you read, and obviously plot and character. But without the visuals, it just wouldn't be as hard-hitting, which is why I told you to go read it for yourself. Uncanny art paired with a story about loneliness and the borders of reality blurring, it serves the novel very well. Also, I really have grown to love Drnaso's art style. Sometimes I just think it looks cool and pretty, like in many of the surreal borders throughout acting class, but I also love that it makes me feel weird. The eyes of the characters in acting class really freak me out, and the expressions, and I love that feeling. Now, I'm going to summarize the plot of acting class in a pretty basic way so that we can all know what we're dealing with here. And afterwards we can analyze the characters individually and get into a bit more detail overall. Also, listen here, you're really gonna have to lock in and pay attention to what I'm on about, not just because I'm great and cool, but also because there are like 10 prominent characters in this novel. So let's ask the age-old question, what the fuck happens in acting class? Acting class begins in a modern Chicago-inspired American city by introducing us to various characters through vignettes of their lives. Each of them join an acting class. The first 4 classes are free, but word has it that everybody who gives the class a go always comes back to pay for more. 10 participants meet in the community center to start the classes, where they meet their instructor, John Smith, a name that is easy to forget. They proceed with an unremarkable series of acting exercises, including an improvised scene between 2 of the participants. During this scene, as the participants become more convincing and more invested in their roles, their surroundings transform into the settings they're imagining rather than the room they're actually in. At this point, we can assume that this is a stylistic choice to represent the level of immersion the participants are experiencing in the scene, but keep this in mind as we go forward. We don't get to see all of the class, but assumedly it was good enough to warrant return, as all the participants come back to the community centre the following Wednesday night. This time, John assigns each of the participants roles as prompts, and has them imagine they're attending a house party. As the characters act out the scene, the artwork switches back and forth between showing them in an apartment at a party and showing them in the actual building they're acting in, again to represent their level of investment in the scene. This time, a bit of tension arises. Some of the participants get too into their characters or not enough into their characters. Others are uncomfortable with the roles they've been given and cast some suspicion on John, like he might be targeting their vulnerabilities and fears with the roles he gave them. John claims that challenging them is the whole point of the exercise. In the week that follows, the participants make some odd self-destructive decisions. One loses her job after injuring a client, another wanders aimlessly for a week in a fugue state, another seems unable to shake off the role he was given during the class. Overall, it seems like the class is affecting all of them one way or another. For the next Wednesday night class, the community centre is closed for maintenance apparently, so John has the group come out to a remote countryside location. From here on out, I'll be referring to this place as John's house for the sake of simplicity. However, this isn't actually his home. It actually might be the home of the janitor from the community centre, who knows John well and is letting him stay on the property. Some of the participants have grown more skeptical and suspicious over the week, and a lot of them feel worse than they did before they started the classes, but they go along with this lesson anyway. After a warm-up, John instructs everyone to lie down and create a scene in their minds as completely as possible. He wants them to experience the scene and see what happens, inferring that you can relinquish control in a way. John says, "You'll be surprised where your mind goes in desperation," and that it will only work if everyone submits to the process. The way these individual scenes play out might initially remind you of a lucid dream or something like maladaptive daydreaming. Except for a lot of the participants, it looks like they forget that they're not experiencing reality. There is some bizarre overlap where some participants seem to visit each other in their scenes, but it's not clear if this is really happening or not. There's a lot that's up for debate in this novel when it comes to what's real and what isn't. That's kind of the whole point. I'll go into the details of the individual experiences later. For now, I'll just say that the scenarios are varied. All of them feel unsettling on some level, but some are straight up frightening and anxiety-inducing. One of them made me feel physically sick, but we can talk about that when we get to Lou. When one of the participants finally comes to, she realizes that it is 3 in the morning. They've all been out for hours, and John didn't wake them. When confronted, he is defensive and formal in his rebuttal, and the way he speaks sounds rehearsed. He says, "I'm really sorry if you feel that I made the wrong decision, but I have my methods, and I was doing what I thought was right." During the following week, almost everybody goes back to their daily lives, but again, the class has had a noticeable effect on the participants. Even the most grounded are irritable, distracted, and unsure of their own reality. Other participants are either trying to get back to the scenes they were in, they're convinced that what they experienced was real, or they are experiencing a mental health crisis. Despite everything, they all find reasons to return for the final class. One of the participants runs into the janitor from before who knows John. When questioned, the janitor is vague about how he met John, but says John is the most genuine person he's ever met, and that the class participants have nothing to worry about. It becomes obvious when everyone meets up that more than one participant has become convinced of the class's benefits. They've even started speaking the way that John does, in this weird, rehearsed manner, and they have one foot out of reality. One of the participants has had to bring her 3-year-old son, who initially plays in a corner while the acting class continues. However, the son winds up joining the warm-ups and also the long-form improvisation that the class concludes with. From now on, I'll refer to this as the long-form improv. John describes it as an uninterrupted, fully immersive, multi-part story. No guidelines, no themes. The word usage here is very pertinent and telling, I think. Uninterrupted, fully immersive. These phrases could be harmless in this setting, but if you think about them with the unsettling buildup of subtext that we've seen throughout the story with John, they might worry you. John also says, think of it like a Ouija board. You're all telling a story, but you can't tell who's moving the pointer. I'll tell you all right now, John is moving the pointer. If you didn't come to this conclusion already, John is a very dangerous individual. He is one of the most successfully manipulative characters I've come across in fiction. We'll see this come to a head very soon. Everyone spreads out and closes their eyes, and when they open them, the community centre basement has transformed into this new world, which looks different depending on who we focus on. John said already that he will fill in secondary roles during the improvisation to move the story along. In the artwork, John never appears as himself during the improv, but rather as other characters in this fake world. I'm going to call them all Johns, though there can be arguments made over which ones are John and which are figments of other characters' imaginations. We'll come to that later, but for now it's important to note that a lot of the participants truly become completely immersed in this world, to the point of forgetting that the majority of the other people they encounter are all John. When some participants realize how badly this is messing with them, they corner John and demand to be let out of the scene, and it's only when he kicks them out and breaks character that the art shows the characters in the community centre again. Those 3 characters manage to leave, but the rest remain completely immersed in their scenes. Many of these scenes intersect and overlap. Several characters experience the same scenes and can see the same things in their surroundings and describe them the same way to each other. Many characters traverse days during the improv. In all their scenes, they begin to travel a distance until they wind up in the same place, out in John's house, the location from the 3rd class. John and the janitor both arrive shortly after. John tells everyone that they have been accepted into the next phase of the class and that it starts right now. A van, like the one John arrived in, pulls up and out files several other people. John introduces them as his Friday morning class. All smiling, the classes start to introduce themselves to each other. John says that where they're going will involve crossing the state line, and he tells everyone to get in the van. All but one comply. Rosie, the woman who did the blind date roleplay I mentioned at the top of this video, a person who has always had her suspicions about the class, blinks, and suddenly she sees everyone as they are. And they are all really out at John's house. They all somehow travelled from the community centre out to this middle of nowhere location, which has been established to be very far away from everything. Notably, it's also daytime, despite the class having started during the night. How much time has passed? John is still talking, explaining that the classes are no longer free, but he's sure they can work something out. The rest of the participants file into the van. Rosie tries to prevent them from leaving, but can't manage it. Not even her husband is swayed by her. John doesn't seem concerned that Rosie could persuade anyone. He isn't going to force Rosie to come, but tries to appeal to her, saying that we have a larger group, a real beehive of activity, talented people from all over the country. When Rosie presses him, devastated for why he's doing this, at first he says, "Because I love it. This is my life." But after that he says, "Rosie, I'm just a recruiter. You're talking to me as if I run the organisation." The van speeds off, leaving Rosie calling after them to come back. She wanders out onto the road. When a car comes, Rosie hides in a bush. The person in the car says, "Hello, do you need any help?" But Rosie doesn't emerge. The car takes off. So that is a very simplified character strip summary of acting class. Do you see why this freaks me out so badly? Though the word cult is never used in this book, I think acting class is most literally understood as a story about people being recruited by a cult that presents as a front group. West and Langone defined cults in 1986 as a group or movement exhibiting a great or excessive devotion or dedication to some person, idea, or thing, and employing unethically manipulative techniques of persuasion and control designed to advance the goals of the group's leaders to the actual or possible detriment of members, their families, or the community. If we consult a guidance note drawn up in April 2025 by the Legislative Assembly Legal and Social Issues Committee, sorry, I can't say that word, we can already, just from that vague plot summary, identify several tactics and methods used in cult recruitment. The organisation masks as a front group this acting class and provides free classes to entice newcomers. They gradually indoctrinate the group via the classes and don't fully disclose the nature or core beliefs of the group. They start by asking for a small commitment, but require more and more of the participants as the classes continue. They use a charismatic leader to entice the class. They exploit, they isolate, and emotionally and psychologically manipulate the already vulnerable participants until they end up on a fucking bus travelling across state lines to God knows where. Thematically, we're looking at something much more intricate than a pure cult horror, and much of that falls to the huge cast of characters. Earlier in the novel, John Smith declares that everyone in this group feels like a social misfit. He says, "You're here because something is wrong in your life, right? You feel out of step with your normal routine. You would like to see a new dimension." The choice of the word dimension is very particular and interesting given how far things go later. I think it's a bit culty in and of itself. Not far from the end of the story, John Smith praises the openness and vulnerability of the class. He says that those traits are the key. The key to what, John? When recruiting members, it's common knowledge that cults target the vulnerable, quote, people in emotional, financial, or psychological distress. If you feel alienated from society, if you are open enough to join a random acting class, desperate enough to keep coming back, as long as you, as a human being, have some vulnerability, some insecurity, manipulators will pick on that and pry a long-healed scar into an open wound. That's how these characters got here, and that is what I plan to examine in each of them in the coming portion of this video. Now, I'm no expert in cults. Thankfully, I've never been in one. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a writer with a degree in English and creative writing. I can analyse the characters in acting class on that basis. I think the cult aspect of this story is a tool used by Drnaso to talk about the vulnerabilities of the lonely modern age, social performance, and the enormous appeal of escapism in our late capitalist society. I'm going to analyse the characters in acting class on the basis of these themes to see how they ended up in whatever state they're in by the end of the story. Nobody comes away unscathed. Angel is one of, if not the most obviously lonely character in acting class. She's a woman racked by terrible anxiety, and this greatly affects her social life. When we meet Angel, she's overstayed her welcome at a party and is babbling on about her anxiety-ridden thought process. Angel is the only one still there, and the hosts are conspiring to try and get her to leave without being rude. They give her lots of social cues, none of which Angel picks up on. This goes on for so long that the hosts begin to wonder if she's trying to avoid going home, but as they confer, Angel pipes up and says that she's so sorry, but she has to be going. It seems like she's bad at reading social situations, maybe because of her habit of overthinking. Angel is so in her own head that she struggles to recognize what effect she might have on others. Therefore, she struggles to connect with people and leads a pretty lonely, insecure life. When Angel leaves the apartment that the party was in, the hosts say it was nice to meet her, inferring that they had just met Angel that night. While there's potential to read Angel as sinister in this introduction, that's not what I wound up taking from her character at all. She's one of the easier characters to read into, in my opinion, though that doesn't make her any less fascinating, as she is one of the first to become extremely susceptible to John Smith's teachings in a detrimental way. Angel doesn't have much to do in the first acting class, though noticeably she doesn't put up her hand when John asks who in the class is nervous. I'm not sure how to interpret this, but I kind of doubt that she's completely chill, given what we know about her. But who knows? I mean, I have bad anxiety, but sometimes I feel calm in the weirdest circumstances, like doing readings or accepting awards in front of crowds, but going to Tesco shakes me to my core. Social anxiety doesn't always play by the rules, is what I mean to say, so Angel not putting up her hand can be read in a myriad of ways. Later that week, we see Angel at her job, where she works with Rosie, who she invited to join the class, turns out. Angel is a little needy in their conversation, which at this point is to be expected of her character. Angel is enthusiastic about the class already, and says she's been thinking about something John said about minor alleviations. Obviously, an alleviation is a weight off the chest kind of thing to lessen the suffering of something. What I don't get is why John was talking about this and what the context could have been, so if any of you have theories, let me know. The second class is when things really kick off for Angel. During the party scene, John assigns Angel the role of the rebel without a cause, somebody who can't be pinned down, who moves freely to avoid responsibility and attachment. Now, we know at this point that this role is antithetical to who Angel is, and I think John knows this and assigned her this prompt on purpose. Angel gets into character pretty quickly by sitting by a window and smoking. As aforementioned, the art looks like they're at a house party, but sometimes when it cuts to the real surroundings, it shows no window and no cigarette. Though when Angel looks out the imaginary window, she sees a brightly coloured city with a rich nightlife. Rosie's husband, Dennis, who is also a participant in the class, has been assigned the role of a man infatuated with Angel, so he approaches her and they have a stilted chat. Angel is deep in her role already, resisting any moments of character break that Dennis makes leeway for. Then Angel, who has known Dennis in real life for some time, calls him really boring and says that he has always been boring. This is an instance of breaking character because they're supposed to have just met at this party, but it's also Angel's real opinion on Dennis. This is a big change for her because she's been so steeped in social anxiety till now. We would never expect her to say something so blunt and rude. Dennis is surprised too and awkwardly leaves. At this point, John Smith approaches Angel and asks her, out of character, what happened. Angel admits that she got a little too real with Dennis, confirming that that was her real opinion of him. She feels guilty. Angel has been portrayed as this really oblivious, desperate person, but this moment reveals that she's not fully naive in her opinions of other people. She clocked that Dennis is boring as hell. Sorry, Dennis, we'll get to you. Angel immediately starts worrying about the social repercussions of what she said to Dennis, back to her usual self. John knows already that Angel is a nervous person. He says that it probably felt good to be rude and crude for a change, and tells her that the real Angel should take a hike for a while. Keep this wording in mind. Not long after this, Angel, remaining in character, leaves the class really abruptly as though she was leaving the party, saying that she has to go meet a friend. We watch Angel leave the community centre into that same busy city street that she saw from the imaginary window earlier. We've seen the exterior of the community centre before and it looked nothing like this. Angel walks out to a car and meets a friend, Natalie, a woman in a yellow raincoat. I'll tell you right now, the scenery isn't real and Natalie isn't real either. Angel is imagining all of this as though it's happening, and she is staying in this cool, no-strings-attached character too. The next time we see Angel, she's standing on a street corner in the same clothes from the last class, though it's been days since. Neil, another participant, runs into Angel and strikes up a conversation, but Angel is acting distracted and untalkative. Neil gives her the address for the location of the next class. Angel also donates $93 for the food bank Neil is doing community service for. She says it's all she has on her, but seems very chilled about donating it all. She says she feels great, but in that last panel, colourful stars appear around her head. This is a stylistic choice rather than a literal representation of what's happening. These stars are a motif that reveal themselves time and time again throughout acting class. I think they represent how reality is bending or breaking for the characters, or John's manipulation getting to them. It also reminds me of that expression, seeing stars, which is used for when somebody is dazed, maybe after receiving a blow to the head, which is metaphorically what John is doing to these people. I'll be making note from now on of whenever the stars appear. Their appearance around Angel does suggest that something is up with her, but you've probably gathered that anyway. Neil doesn't clock it, and Angel leaves. On the night of the third class, Angel shows up out in John's house. Same clothes as last week, and seems much more like herself, running for Rosie and saying she needs help. Angel confesses that the last thing she remembers is the beginning of the second class last Wednesday. She woke up today in a diner with a bunch of strangers 30 miles outside the city. They'd met her on a hiking trail and been hiking and camping in the forest with her and having loads of fun. Remember when John told the real Angel to take a hike for a while? Jokes aside, Angel is really scared. She only knows about these 2 days from the hikers and doesn't remember anything from before. The hikers drove her to the address written on her arm, but Angel doesn't remember that Neil gave it to her, though he shows up quickly and fills her in a bit. When Rosie tells her that she's very close to being fired at work, Angel is panicky and upset. She's definitely now out of that fugue state she was stuck in. Despite all this, Angel elects to attend the class instead of letting Rosie take her to the hospital. She hopes she can figure out what happened from the other participants. Angel was so close to getting out after this incident scared her, but she'd already been primed to think that she had to go back to John for answers. During the third class, you might remember that John has everybody lie down, close their eyes, and create a scenario for themselves in their minds. From here on out, I'll be referring to these sequences as solo scenes for the sake of simplicity. During Angel's solo scene, Angel finds herself in that same colourful, bustling city, asking around for her friend Natalie, the imaginary woman who picked her up from the second class. She finds Natalie in a club and they are relieved to see each other. Natalie implores Angel to skip work and says that it's uncharacteristic of Angel to worry about missing responsibilities or to even have responsibilities. So whatever version of Angel that Natalie knows is the drifting through life, chilled person that John told her to be. It's clear that Angel is intoxicated by this version of herself and by this bright, colourful world she's found herself in. Natalie says, you can't do this halfway. So Angel agrees to stay. This is where we lose the Angel we've come to know as the real Angel. When everyone starts to wake from their solo scenes, Angel has retreated into her dissociative state. We catch a glimpse of her perspective where she's on a houseboat with friends. John says that Wade the janitor can give Angel a ride back to the city tomorrow, and Angel refuses to leave with anyone else, so they're forced to leave her behind. While we don't see Angel again until the next class, we know that she doesn't come home, because Rosie breaks into her apartment, turns out Angel left a cat behind, and we also learn that Angel changed her forwarding address. Rosie finds no address book or family contact in Angel's apartment, which, to me, confirms that Angel is alone in the world, making her even more vulnerable than we knew her to be already. Angel only reappears in the final class with John, wearing once again the same clothes. She's been safe at John's place this whole time. When Rosie confronts her, Angel only reacts to the realization that her neighbour is not caring for the cat like she said she would. I think this reflects that the cat was the only real connection Angel felt like she had, and it wasn't enough to keep her there. Although Angel is also in an altered state right now, so it's hard to know what she would really be thinking. Something to note in this whole interaction is how John-like Angel is behaving. She gaslights Rosie when Rosie tries to express her worry by saying Rosie should have driven out to John's place if she'd been so concerned. Angel is even talking like John, with that same rehearsed cadence and tangential sentences. She says, "I'm able to make my own decisions. You have helped me immensely. I'm so grateful for our friendship." John has gotten to Angel maybe more than any other participant, seeing as she's literally been living with him the past week. I was even thinking, maybe Angel did emerge back out of this dissociative state while she was with John, but he would have found a way to put her right back into it. During the two-person improv scenes that the final class starts with, Angel has a bizarre scene with Dennis that I'll cover later in Dennis's section. What we can take from it for now is that Angel is dragging the other participants down to her level. We're going to see this more overtly later, but both Angel and Dennis in particular are pretty far gone from this point on, which is funny considering how they interacted during the party scene. From there, the class goes into another exercise called What You're Saying Makes Me Feel. I'm going to let John explain this because it'll be relevant with several other characters we cover from now on. He says, it's another two-person exercise. One person begins with a declaration, a proposition, an accusation. A starting point, basically. It could be, I don't love you anymore. It could be something minor like, do you know which way to go? Person 2 responds with, what you're saying makes me feel, fill in the blank. Then add a bit more. Person 1 reacts to that with, what you're saying makes me feel, blank. Then add a bit more. And back and forth. A simple exercise can create a compelling scene. Got it? You will soon if you don't yet. Angel and Dennis pair up for this exercise, and what we get is basically an echo chamber. Dennis comments on Angel's transformation, and Angel says, "What you're saying makes me feel grateful," and so on and so forth. They are very, very complimentary to each other. There's no sense of Angel finding Dennis boring anymore like she admitted to feeling during the second class. After this exercise concludes, we move on to the long-form improv scene that runs up to the conclusion of the story. Angel re-enters her colourful city and continues to inhabit this carefree version of herself. We see her at a bar where she meets John. Not John playing a supporting role in the improv, but actual John, who sits to speak with her. John asks how she's adjusting, and Angel says there's nothing to it, she loves it here, and that she's living a free style of life and does this and that for money. I think John is asking her this stuff to ensure that she's locked into this character and not at risk of leaving her state. John says, "Right from the first class, you've had the spark." Angel seems confident, if distracted. During their conversation, Natalie arrives. Angel and Natalie leave John, deciding to take Natalie's houseboat out. Side note about this scene, Angel first appears here with red glasses that then vanish in the next few panels. Either this is a metaphor or a mistake, I don't know. She's also pictured with these glasses on the cover of the book, but never before or since. So Angel and Natalie take the houseboat out. On the way, they collect several other participants, that being Rosie, Rayanne and her son, and Lou, who also recognize the houseboat as a houseboat, though in reality I think it's a van or a car. At a certain point, they do start walking, with Angel leading the way. I think prior to the class starting, John probably instructed Angel to bring the group to John's house, which is where they end up, of course. Angel happily boards the van when it arrives to take them away, and when Rosie tries to intervene and convince her to stay, Angel says it's not even up for debate. She says she'll miss her cat. That's all. That's where we leave Angel. I can't help but think back on something Angel said to Rosie at the beginning of the final class. She said, "I'm finally able to take care of myself. This experience has been a revelation. I've wasted my life in endless worry. That's all over." I find it heartbreaking because I really do relate to Angel to a certain degree. There are times where I would have done anything to be rid of my anxiety and live my life in a way that could be admirable or even enviable to others. John employed a cult recruitment tactic with Angel that we will see him apply with several other characters. He made her feel like she belonged, and to Angel he provided transformation and salvation. We know from Angel what John does with somebody who arrives at the class full of anxiety and vulnerabilities, but what is he to do with a participant who shows up with a practiced patience, with a serene life? It's a good thing we have a case study in that. Let's talk about Danielle is one of two characters who we don't get an introduction to right away. We only meet her when she arrives to the first class. Initially, you might think that this infers she has something to hide, but unlike the other character who we don't get an introductory vignette for pre-classes, Danielle doesn't get a scene in the opening because her life is pretty unremarkable. We don't get a solid reason for her joining the classes and can assume it might be to break up the monotony of her daily life. Speaking of Danielle's daily life, she works as a physical therapist, and it seems like she's valued at her job. She makes light conversation with Pete, a difficult client, and says to a co-worker that she's got a handle on him. Interesting phrasing. Overall, Danielle seems like a patient person, which I think was also evident during her performance in the first class. Skipping on to the second class, during the party scene, John gives Danielle a prompt. Her cat just died and she is drunk and sorrowful and callous when drunk. Danielle does a good job playing this out, and Neil, another character, implies that her performance felt very real. It's quite intense. I'm not sure why John gave Danielle this role, but I do think it affects her. Though towards the end we see her and Rosie breaking character for a second, and Danielle goes, "Jesus, what are we doing here?" Which shows us that, unlike Angel, we didn't really lose Danielle in this exercise at any point, even if she was affected by her own performance. But how did the second class affect Danielle exactly? Probably just something normal, like intentionally injuring her client at work. Remember when Danielle said she had a handle on her difficult client Pete? She intentionally pushes too far during their physical therapy session and hurts him. There's no blood or gore in these panels, but the expression of pain on Pete's face and how Danielle forces his leg up is disturbing to look at, especially because we're not inside Danielle's head and can't understand what came over her. I did say before that it seems like Danielle is a patient person, but in the lead up to this incident she seems a tiny bit frustrated. Maybe she just snapped, but not in an obvious way. She doesn't start yelling or screaming, she seems stunned by her own actions and says she doesn't really know what happened. She apologizes to her employer, but he has to fire her. The words the employer uses to fire Danielle mirrors a scene in the first class where Danielle pretended to fire another participant as part of a scene, so this gives her deja vu, yet another instance of reality and play blurring. By the way, the colourful stars show up around Danielle's head at the end of this scene. For the third class, Danielle heads out to John's house and has a chat with Gloria, another participant. Danielle is unsure about the class and admits to having had a horrible week, though she doesn't directly mention getting fired. Danielle says, "Even little interactions are hard. Yesterday I got my oil changed, and this guy in the waiting area was making small talk. Normally that would be no big deal. I'm pretty easygoing. But I found that I couldn't talk. I couldn't think clearly. I was sure he was judging me. And I got lost in my own head. I was actually sweating. It felt like I was giving a bad performance. That's something that would have never crossed my mind before." I think this feeling might have influenced the incident in Danielle's workplace too. Danielle is struggling to differentiate between reality and performance, so much so that she is losing her natural social skills. Actually, back in the first class, John praised Danielle for her perfect instincts during her performance. Quite ironic, I think. Moving on to Danielle's solo scene, hers is actually the first we get. Danielle imagines herself in a waiting room while she gets her oil changed, making small talk with a man. So this is the situation she just described to Gloria, though in this sequence she doesn't seem stressed or unable to talk. In the scene, Danielle talks to the man about an article John just mentioned during the class and says it's in the magazine she is holding, and ends up telling this guy a story about a ghost she saw as a child. The story goes that Danielle saw a figure in the driveway of her house who vanished before her eyes. Her father promised to keep her safe from the ghost, but later made fun of Danielle to the rest of her family. This is an interesting anecdote. We can assume it's true, not necessarily that there was really a ghost, but that this is a real thing that Danielle experienced. So what does that tell us about Danielle? It seems like another instance of her not being able to trust her own reality, not just when it comes to the ghost, but also how she's treated by the people who are supposed to love her. Her dad probably wasn't an evil person, but he didn't believe her, and her realizing that clearly made an impression on her. It reminds me a bit of something that happened to Dennis in his past, which we'll get to when we talk about him. The man in Danielle's scene asks to read the article from the magazine she said it was in, but Danielle leaves abruptly while the guy looks through the magazine and effectively calls her bluff about the article being in there. Danielle drives away with an anxious expression. Even in this scene, Danielle created entirely in her own head, specifically to reenact and process not just one but two moments from her life. Danielle can't escape the fear of social faux pas. This is an odd scene, but it really rings true to my socially anxious self. Anytime I make some small choice in a social interaction, part of me expects it to spiral out of control, or that I'll be caught in shame for embellishing small details. I think Drnaso captures that feeling really well here. Danielle is the first to wake out of the scenarios, and she quickly gets everybody out of John's house when she realizes the time, which shows that she's not fully warped by the class just yet. During the week, we get a moment with Danielle that feels absurd to me. Danielle's at a record store and picks up a vinyl for Olive and Adrian's Night Is When I'm Wistful. This is not a real album that exists in our world, as far as I can tell. On the back cover, it looks like John Smith is pictured. The name John S. is also listed in the credits under the role of advisor. A worker approaches Danielle saying, "That album is a gem. Do you have any questions?" To which Danielle says, "Am I going crazy?" You know what? Fair question, Danielle. I'm wondering the same thing. Having thought about it, I think I believe that John really is on this album cover and that this is the real thing Danielle is seeing. What this means, though, I can't say. Maybe this is from a time before John became a recruiter, but his role of advisor makes me think otherwise. Either way, this is fucking Danielle up. She feels like maybe John is invading her subconscious. Danielle is clearly suspicious about attending the final class. While climbing the stairs in the community centre, she bumps into Wade the janitor and questions him a bit but comes away feeling more uneasy than before. She plays along though, and John has her do an introduction exercise where she has to be very specific about herself. She's a little skeptical but goes on to discuss various facts about herself. She ends it with, "Sometimes I scream in my sleep." I wonder if this fact about her screaming in her sleep is a recent thing, like a symptom of the classes, or not. Moving on to the What You're Saying Makes Me Feel segment, Danielle plays a dying character with another participant, Lou, who is grieving her death. These two have, from what we've seen, barely interacted, but here they perform an emotional scene where they both say the other was great. During the scene, Danielle says she feels wistful, regretful, depleted, and serene. On depleted, she says, "I'm losing touch with reality." I don't fully know what to make of this for Danielle, except that she does come out of it in the end. It's reminiscent to me of the really intense role John gave her at the party, which was also around the topic of death and required a heavy emotional moment from her, but which she also broke out of. John might have been trying to trap her in this feeling and weigh her down, but it's never really worked the way he hoped it would. Finally, in the long-form improv, Danielle appears in a grayscale town. She's staying in a boarding house while looking for work. Danielle seems generally uneasy. She walks around a lot and encounters several Johns. All the Johns attempt to strike up conversations with Danielle quite unnaturally, and they all talk about how great this little town is and that Danielle should stick around. This is definitely John trying to entice Danielle into staying with the class, but to her credit, it doesn't work. Danielle makes excuses to run away from all of them. Even when Gloria approaches, the same woman that Danielle confided in the last class, Danielle tries to resist talking to her until Gloria gets through to her, and Danielle apologizes, seeming confused about the reality of the situation. The two of them realize they're in sync about their surroundings. They see the same stuff and can't exactly remember how they got to this location. They're not even sure how long this has been going on. Both Danielle and Gloria have to fight to remember their surroundings aren't real, but Danielle is able to decide that she wants to leave the class. And she does. Danielle is one of the 4 escapees of the class. It takes work to break the illusion. She and Gloria have to confront John and have him ban them from the class, but it does work and Danielle gets out. I honestly have the most faith that Danielle could get back to normal following the class, though after the incident that led to her being fired, who knows if she'll ever get back into her field of work. Her life is different now. You know, while we're at it, let's talk about another of the participants who escaped John's grasp, and the character that might be my favourite overall. You've met Rosie already. She's one half of the couple that acting class opens with, and she's a final escapee of the cult at the end of the book. From her introductory scene, we can gather that Rosie is in an unhappy marriage, that she might not be trying as hard as her husband to fix it, and that she can't stick with the insincerity of the blind date roleplay, a trait of hers which foreshadows the powerful role she plays in the rest of the story. Rosie is quite an active participant in the first class, and we get to see a less tense version of her while she's meeting other people. She's inquisitive during the class, asking John about his background, his replies as vague as you'd expect, and being sincerely uplifting towards the other participants. She says to another participant that she and Dennis are willing to try anything, which she probably means in an open-minded way, but knowing what we do about the state of her marriage to Dennis, this statement holds a double meaning of desperation. When John asks who's nervous, Rosie is one of 3 people to not raise their hand, which makes sense for her. Rosie is a tough character. We can understand why when we hear a little about her upbringing. Later in the book, Rosie says on the topic of being a resilient kid, "I went through a lot of shit, but I'm grateful because of the way I turned out." She implies that her mom was not a great parent. We don't hear anything more specific than that, but we can assume Rosie is being truthful here and had a shit childhood. What I find interesting is that she infers she's grateful for her trauma and how it shaped her. This also shows why Rosie might not have as much sympathy for someone like Dennis, who was affected by an event in his own childhood that Rosie considers far more minor in comparison to whatever happened to her. She's probably thinking that if she could accept what happened to her and even be grateful for it, then why can't he let go of something so much lesser? I don't necessarily think this is healthy coming from Rosie, but I definitely see why she thinks this way. Nowadays, Rosie is skeptical and resilient, and these traits do ensure her escape from the class at the end of the book, and maybe she wouldn't have been so tough if it weren't for her traumatic upbringing. But, to be clear, a bad thing resulting in a good thing does not retroactively make the bad thing good. Nobody ever has to be grateful for their trauma, but that is how Rosie feels. As aforementioned, Rosie works the same job as Angel. I can go into a bit more detail with the job here because it's unique work and I think it has a bit of thematic relevance. But when do I not think that? Rosie works in a kind of warehouse where the workers write personalized names on the shirts of little figurines. They do 300 a day. Dolls and figurines are a recurring image throughout the artwork in acting class, which I think speaks to the theme of acting or disingenuity. Dolls are made to resemble humans, and acting class is a story about humans trying to resemble humans, learning how to act natural. Rosie has been working this job for 3 years. She doesn't pay much attention to the figurines themselves and says she doesn't hang too much self-esteem on a job. When she trains in a new employee, a teenage girl named Jenna, she's welcoming and helpful the same way she was during the acting class. When Angel asks Rosie about the next class, Rosie doesn't seem especially keen, which makes sense given her habit of skepticism. However, of course, she does go to the second class, wherein Rosie is assigned a prompt for the party scene. This prompt is that she, in this scene, is intensely attracted to another participant, Rayanne. Rosie plays this out, but Rayanne, due to her own secret role, seems distracted and uninvested. Eventually, Rosie finds Rayanne outside the party, which is just in a corner of the gym that they're doing this in. Rayanne breaks down, and at first it's not clear if it's in character or not. I think it's half and half, because it turns out that the role John gave Rayanne was very close to home. I will get to that when we talk more about Rayanne, but what you need to know for now is that Rosie breaks character over this and is horrified that John gave Rayanne such an affecting role. She looks over at John with suspicion, and he looks right back at her. The next time we see Rosie, she's at work with some colourful stars around her head. Rosie is worried about Angel not coming to work, and she's a bit stressed that Jenna, the teenage employee, is not being very attentive, but the appearance of the stars definitely shows something else going on with her too. Rosie carpools out with Dennis, Gloria, Beth and Rayanne to the new location for the third class. When they park, Rosie is the first to say that she feels weird about all of this, and Gloria agrees. Rosie asks if anyone in the car told anyone where they'd be tonight, implying that she's worried something will happen to them. This is smart thinking and makes sense for Rosie as a character, but this is also something that a lot of women think and talk about because we have to worry for our own safety a lot. I think it's notable that Dennis, the only man in the car, dismisses their fears and says, at worst it'll be a waste of time or a good story. I guess he's right about the good story part. When Angel comes to Rosie and tells her about her week of amnesia following the last class, Rosie is shocked but says she's heard of this happening and tells Angel she can drive her to the hospital, once again establishing herself as a proactive, concerned and responsible person, down to the fact that she's heard of blackouts, fugue states or instances of amnesia and takes them seriously, and she doesn't judge Angel. But Rosie doesn't force Angel to go either and instead follows her into the class. Rosie tries to talk to John about Angel's situation, but it doesn't seem like any conversation happens. Instead, they begin the class and do some warm-ups. One of these warm-ups involves a leader-follower exercise where one participant mirrors the expression of another as closely as possible. I wanted to note this because Rosie and Rayanne pair up for this and get quite physically close, with Rosie matching Rayanne's expressions. We've seen Rosie be particularly supportive with Rayanne, which began back in the second class when she found out what role John assigned Rayanne, and also in the car on the way here when Rayanne expressed some insecurity. It seems like Rosie is fond of Rayanne. Coupled with the role John gave Rosie back at the party where she was supposed to be attracted to Rayanne, this is about where I began to wonder about Rosie's feelings for her. Somebody please make an edit of them for me and me alone, because it's just me in this fanbase. I'm kidding, I don't think they should be together, but wouldn't it be juicy if that's what was happening? We'll talk about it more soon. I actually think I'm probably wrong about this assumption, and we'll see why I think that later. After this exercise, John gives one of his little speeches. He says he read about a study, not read a study, but read about a study, which found that people who hold some kind of belief statistically live longer lives. Happy people live longer as well. That means our mission is obvious, to believe in something and to be happy. Seems only tangentially related to the premise of this class, but okay. I did find an article on a study from Ohio State University on people with religious affiliations living longer, but that article had other explanations for why that may be, like the social aspect of religious communities and the restriction of unhealthy practices that might otherwise shorten your lifespan. Knowing John, he'd probably pick and choose what evidence benefits him. And we know why John is bringing this up. This is maybe the most explicit he gets with his intent without outright saying that he's a recruiter like he does at the end of the book. Rosie has an interesting retort to this, which she whispers to Rayanne. She says, I read that article. It also said that depressed people tend to see the world more accurately. I also found a Vice article that echoes this claim on the topic of depressive realism, which specifically refers to the mildly depressed and not those who suffer with major depressive disorder, which tends to distort reality. The article suggests that while there is evidence for this idea, there's not enough to be concrete about, at least there wasn't in 2017 when the article was written. It's not really something that you'd want to believe, unless you're Rosie. I think it's possible that Rosie is talking about herself when she brings up that part of the article, consciously or otherwise. This sentiment and the kind of pride in it reminds me of what Rosie said about being grateful for her traumatic upbringing because of who it shaped her into. I don't think it's hard to believe that Rosie could be mildly depressed. She's certainly in a place of discontentment with aspects of her life, and she's a skeptical person who prides herself on that fact and on her resilience and realism. So if that were to coincide with depression, I wouldn't be surprised if she coped by taking pride in it. Next up is Rosie's solo scene. Rosie finds herself in her and Dennis's apartment. She's self-aware about this exercise, thinking, isn't something supposed to happen? However, she suddenly feels happier, lacking in the familiar sense of dread I feel when I'm at home. Then Dennis comes in, and it seems like Rosie's dread returns. They talk like Dennis is here, in Rosie's head, like he's moved here. He says he didn't like his scenario, so he hopped over to hers. This pisses Rosie off. She says she wants some things to just be for her. She doesn't want to do everything with Dennis. Rosie also figures that if Dennis could travel to her scene, maybe she can get to Rayanne's, and she actually tries to make this happen. To which Dennis asks why she wants to go to Rayanne so badly. If this is real Dennis, then we might be seeing the jealous side of Dennis that Rosie referred to in the second class, or what I think is more likely to be true, Rosie kind of knows that she's feeling something about Rayanne that might warrant jealousy from her husband. I mean, why does she want to go to Rayanne, especially if she's so worried about Angel? Why do you think about Rayanne so much, Rosie? That's all I want to know. Anyway, Rosie tells Dennis to get out of her head. Dennis says, I don't have any control over it, Rosie. I live here. Double meaning. Rosie calls out to John that she wants a new scenario. Dennis says the class has made him different, which Rosie refutes. Nothing has changed. You're proving my point. Even my scenario is about you. Dennis tells her to give herself over to the process and listen to John. So I don't know if Dennis really did manage to leap over to Rosie's sequence. We never see them talk about this in real life, so there's no confirmation. I decided to cover this sequence just in Rosie's section rather than in Dennis's too, because I think it's more likely that this Dennis is a figment of Rosie's imagination, a kind of representation of how Rosie sees Dennis, which still counts as Dennis invading Rosie's scene, but it's the thought of Dennis rather than literal Dennis. This is very up for interpretation, though. I think the thing Dennis said about giving over to John and the process kind of makes me think that this really might be Dennis. Also, we see in Rayanne's solo scene that Rosie hopped over to hers, and I'm not sure if that's real or not either, but we can cover that when we get to Rayanne. Anyway, all of that just makes me question the reality of the world in this story. When Rosie comes to, awoken by Danielle, she is furious because of how long John let them be for. She wakes up Rayanne first, I wonder why, and then tries to bring Angel back to her senses to no avail. She's pressured into leaving Angel behind. We can tell Rosie is deeply worried and regretful about leaving Angel, and when she gets back to work, she pleads with her manager over Angel's absence, but the manager says, there's a reality we have to deal with. That day at work, Rosie is exhausted and can't think clearly. It's only her and Jenna, the teenage employee, on the floor, and Jenna arrives late and makes several mistakes, which is worse than it already would be considering they're on a time crunch. Rosie is short with Jenna about this, and Jenna ends up quitting the job, despite Rosie begging her to stay and help. So things have just gotten even more stressful. Later that week, we see Rosie at Angel's apartment, but as we know, Angel isn't there. Rosie sees a cat in the window of Angel's place and breaks in to rescue it. The cat had broken open a bag of food, and Rosie calls the cat a survivor. I think maybe she can relate. She brings the cat home. On the way to the following class, Rosie is terrified that Angel won't be there. She's soothed momentarily by Rayanne showing up and is glad to meet her son, 3-year-old Marcus, who Rayanne had to bring. Marcus seems happy enough to be around all the participants, but the only person he isn't receptive to is Rosie. He hides away from her, which Rosie brushes off, though I think it might disappoint her more than she lets on. But after this, when they descend to the basement where John is, Rosie sees Angel and pulls her aside to confront her, which we've already gone over. I think it's important to note that despite all Angel's insistence, Rosie is not satisfied, though she does concede. Rosie offers to give Angel a ride home, but Angel ignores her. The stress does not end there for Rosie. After Angel and Dennis have a particularly intense 2-person improv, which I will cover the details of soon, Rosie tries to talk to Dennis only to find that he is far gone and won't listen to her when she says she wants to leave now and take Angel. Rosie partners with Rayanne for the "what you're saying makes me feel" exercise, and she struggles to focus during it. This is quite a sad moment for our girl Rosie, who I think is not playing a character at first, whereas Rayanne is. Rosie says she feels comforted by and bonded to Rayanne, and Rayanne says they'll get through this. I think Rosie is interpreting this as a real conversation they're having through this exercise. But then Rayanne reveals that she is playing a character, a therapist, and we get this one panel of Rosie with no speech bubble, just her being taken aback, not having realised that what Rayanne was saying was a part of the scene. She expresses feeling incredibly sad. She says, "I might have trapped myself in an unhealthy situation." You definitely have, girl, on multiple levels. Listen, whatever the bond is between Rosie and Rayanne, it's clearly deep, at least on Rosie's end, but I think Rosie hoped it would be one thing and Rayanne is not seeing that way. Whether that's romantic and platonic, or real and not real, or both, I don't know. Either way, this is a very sad scene to me. From there, we move into the long-form improv. Rosie starts her scene driving through the countryside, the kind of place that she said that she likes earlier. Taking directions from a few Johns, Rosie finds her sister, Rayanne. This threw a wrench into my Rosie in love with Rayanne theory. I think there's still leeway for that to be true, but anyway, they're sisters in this version of things. By the way, nobody accused Nick Drnaso of queer-baiting. I don't think that's what's going on here. His work has showcased casual queer representation before. It's always weird and or sad, but so is everything he writes. Anyway, back to the long-form improv. Another odd thing about this scene is that Marcus is happy to see Aunt Rosie suddenly, which seems to surprise Rosie too. He's no longer apprehensive of her as he was earlier. It's clear as the scenes play out that Rosie is still aware of this being an act. She forgets that she's supposed to pretend that she and Rayanne grew up together, and she doesn't catch on immediately to the things Rayanne improvises. However, Rosie does see and hear a frightening figure, probably John, though it's hard to know how she perceives it. She becomes more confused when she and Rayanne go out to dinner in a busy restaurant. Not all these people can be John, but it seems very real to Rosie and Rayanne, though Rosie has some awareness that this is weird. When things get intense back at the house, Rosie says she thinks they should stop, showing that she is still partially in reality. But things don't stop. Time passes in this little world. Days have passed for Rosie and Rayanne. One of those days, Rosie, Rayanne, Marcus, and the dog take the boat out on the lake and end up getting completely lost. They're stuck out there overnight. Again, time is weird in this sequence, but to them it's overnight. And in the morning, Angel comes to rescue them in her friend Natalie's houseboat. Rosie, Rayanne, and Marcus can all see Natalie, by the way. They board, Angel takes them to John's house. This is where Rosie comes to and begs the others to stay. John says to her that it's a shame she won't be coming because she brought a lot of heart to the group. When desperately trying to convince Dennis to stay, Rosie says about the class, "It's all hollow. There's nothing behind it." We know Rosie doesn't convince anyone to stay back, and we know that she's left behind. I want to conclude her section by talking about her final action, which is hiding from a car on the road. She's afraid of the intentions of the person in the car because who knows, maybe they're part of the cult too. Maybe John sent them, or even if they're not related to that, they might still want to hurt her. Even though Rosie was always skeptical and tough and had been previously traumatized in her life and made more resilient by that trauma, she nearly got swept up in this cult. And afterwards, she is left with residual paranoia, and she has just lost everything. On multiple levels, acting class does a great job showing that even if you are the perfect kind of person to not get sucked into a cult or severely manipulated, the point of manipulation is that if it's done well enough, it can work on anybody. Even if you manage to get out, maybe before it's fully taken hold of you, it will still deeply affect your person and your life. It's easy to see people indoctrinated by cults or somebody in an abusive relationship and judge it from the outset by thinking, that would never happen to me because I know the signs and I wouldn't let myself get treated like that, etc., etc. I think acting class does an excellent job of showing us how easy it can be, even for the most conscious among us, even for the reader. The first time I read this book, I had no clue what it was about. I didn't know to look for signs of cult indoctrination. And of course I had the advantage of being a reader and seeing into all these people's lives and heads and how John messes with them. But I was still doubling back and thinking, well, he couldn't have been responsible for all of this. Like, he's a weird guy, but he couldn't have known the participants would react this way. But as we know now, John has always been moving the pointer. He's a master manipulator, and master manipulators know how to pull everyone in. Though it helps when the person is vulnerable, needy, or feeling lost. Much like Dennis is Rosie's husband. Sorry to solely describe him in relation to Rosie, but at least for the first half of the book, I think that's how Dennis would describe himself too. Dennis is much more attached to Rosie or just to his marriage than she is to him. They're kind of an opposites attract, but not in a good way, at least not anymore. He's keen to alleviate tension a lot of the time, which can be harmless, but sometimes becomes avoidant, particularly given his marriage and later when it comes to the class. It's clear that Dennis's reason for joining the class is to improve his relationship with his wife. He seems keen on this kind of approach, but maybe, like Rosie said before, he's just desperate. In the second class, when John starts establishing roles for the party scene, Dennis immediately asks if he and Rosie can roleplay a first meeting between a young couple. That's literally what they were doing with the blind date. John refutes this request and actively John refutes this request and actively splits Dennis and Rosie up, giving their roles different romantic interests. Dennis is paired with Angel, and like Rosie and Rayanne, this dynamic will become important later. But even when this happens, Dennis feels the need to reassure Rosie that any feelings he demonstrates towards Angel won't be real. This does come across as a joke from Dennis, but I still think it's worth noting. Like I mentioned during Angel's analysis, Dennis and Angel's scene becomes strained by their roles. Dennis can't really seem to get into character, and the character he does get into is very similar to himself. Very agreeable, essentially a people pleaser. After Angel insults Dennis by calling him boring, Dennis leaves, which is fair, but he makes a beeline for Rosie. Rosie continues to act like she doesn't know Dennis well. Dennis says he had a dream where they were married, and this conversation becomes tense the same way their blind date did. In the week between the second and third class, we get a little snapshot of what Dennis is up to, and it's sad. He gets home to his and Rosie's apartment, but has forgotten his keys. He can't get in for a while, and it's not clear if Rosie is inside or not. Dennis sits alone with his thoughts on the porch. After not long at all, he carves Rosie and Dennis into the fence. So even after internally stating that he is alone with his thoughts are on him and Rosie. On the way to the next class, Dennis and Rosie carpool with Rayanne, Beth and Gloria to drive to John's house. Dennis says that this journey is kind of eerie, but Rosie loves it. She says the only reason she's really going to this meeting is to get out of the city. Rosie also says to the car, Dennis has trouble being alone with himself, which is a weird thing to say about your husband to a car full of people that you don't know that well. I think Rosie said it because she's frustrated by Dennis, which we mentioned before in her section. That doesn't mean what she said isn't true. We basically got confirmation of this with the last scene where Dennis was outside the house on his own. In the car, he says he's just more of a people person and a people pleaser, as we've established. While talking about childhood, Dennis says that he was always the baby of his family, and that as a 5-year-old, he accidentally made his sister fall on her wedding day. He thinks this really affected him and says, I was never taken seriously. I was always the baby. Rosie is irritated and says, most people get over that kind of thing and don't think they're doomed because of something stupid they did when they were 5. She says that Dennis brings it up more than anyone. I said before that I think Rosie doesn't take this thing in Dennis's past seriously because of how minor it is in comparison to what she went through. Ironically, by her dismissing Dennis talking about this, it repeats exactly what Dennis is talking about. He was never taken seriously. By him saying, and according to Rosie always bringing it up, that he's always a baby, I think this kind of means that Dennis got stuck and has a bit of arrested development. He definitely takes a kind of backseat in his relationship with Rosie, even in the literal sense that Rosie is always the one driving. But this is also true with how he is with everybody. Even in this scene, he and Rosie briefly argue and Dennis quickly gives in, saying, I can't win. When they arrive at the house, Dennis's attitude mellows out. He says he suddenly feels very peaceful out here, dismissing the fears of the others in the car, even Rosie. I think this is where we really see Dennis start to fall for the illusion John is presenting him with. Through Dennis's solo scene, we learn, unsurprisingly, that Dennis doesn't have particularly imaginative ambitions. He wakes in a massive house which he refers to as a palace in his inner monologue. There are big pop art murals of faces and human bodies, more impressions of humans like dolls and ghosts. He's delighted. He thinks that he should be making a story, but is content to just hang out in the house. What got to me a bit was that one of the first things Dennis thinks is that he wants to call Rosie. He thinks she'll love all this. You and I know that Rose's experience in her solo scene was the very opposite. It's just really sad to me. Dennis intends to invite his family over to see the house. He thinks they'll be impressed. Maybe this will show them all that he's someone who can be taken seriously. However, as Dennis tries to sleep in the house, the neighbor starts making noise and refuses to stop. Dennis immediately panics and thinks he'll have to move, which is a very alarming instant reaction. He thinks, oh God, I'm never going to get out of this. This implies that Dennis is fully immersed in the scene and has forgotten that he really will be getting out of this. I don't really know what to make of Dennis so instantly catastrophizing the scenario. Maybe he's a far more anxious person than we or the other characters may have realized. Despite his apparently distressing solo scene, Dennis is the only one to thank John as the participants leave the house and seems unconcerned with how late it is or with Angel's state. We next see Dennis in the car ride on the way to the final class. While Rosie is panicked over Angel, Dennis says John will be able to help, and then over-explains himself to avoid seeming cryptic. They drive in silence after that. When they arrive at the community centre, Dennis seems even more bought in than I originally realised. When another participant seeks reassurance about the lessons, Dennis says, it's all part of the process. Don't get too worked up about it. I think John knows what he's doing. Rosie isn't completely on board yet, but I feel this is helping us. Isn't he kind of talking like John here? All formal and prepared? He's still keen on bringing Rosie into it at this point, but that doesn't last much longer. When the third scene begins, Dennis and Angel are set up to do a 2-person improv scene together. This is an incredibly visual moment, so I would recommend that you look at the screen if you aren't already. Dennis and Angel stare at each other and smile wide. The colourful stars appear, and this moment of connection is stylized by some varied and intense imagery that I'm going to take a second to break down. It takes up almost a whole page. On the left, Angel and Dennis float around as coloured outlines on a black background. Angel floats above a colourful city we've seen her in many times now, and Dennis lies under it. Angel is bringing Dennis into her world. Then we get a shot of organs, literal internal organs. Organs also appear on the cover of acting class, which is disturbing. I think it represents the inner worlds of the characters, like their truest selves. That's a pretty basic reading. However, John also refers to the cult as the organization later. Organization? I've lost my mind, I know. Okay, on we move. More imagery from this page includes a small angel guiding Dennis down onto a yellow panel featuring many doppelgangers of both of them. Below that is a panel of a room full of teddies and garlands. Under that is a panel of prepared meals and dishes, and under that is a panel of various styles of clothes. Under that is Dennis pictured with a joyful expression over a background of bricks, sky, balloons, snowy woodland, and some cross-stitch patterns like a pie or a fence. Beneath that, we get more traditional comic panels with what appear to be silhouettes of Angel and Dennis communicating through blank speech bubbles. I think this is a transference of information only accessible between these two, not even to the reader. Finally, we get a beach bordered by flowers and twin rainbows, with Angel and Dennis's smiling heads on either side. With Dennis and Angel's smiling heads on either side. Over their heads are line drawings of each of them on the beach looking over the water. That's all just that one page. It's a beautiful, overwhelming, near-nonsensical sequence that I tried my best to analyse, but what comes next really puts it in perspective. We cut to both Dennis and Angel rolling around on the floor facing the ceiling with their eyes open. Dennis looks particularly slack. John says, "I love it. Way to shake off your inhibitions." Fucking John. John calls the performance interpretive, like an internal exercise. John has to help Dennis up. I think we fully lost Dennis here too, if we hadn't already. After this, they entered the "what you're saying makes me feel" exercise. Before it starts, Rosie approaches Dennis to ask if he's okay. She calls the performance pretty intense. Dennis is delighted by the performance and Rosie can't get through to him. When she says she wants to leave, Dennis says, "What you're saying makes me feel unsupported." He's already speaking in the exercise format. He's losing the ability to communicate without performing. Then he turns away from Rosie and asks Angel to be his partner in the exercise. This is a far cry from Dennis's former reluctance to be apart from Rosie, especially seeing as this is the first time John really allows them to choose their partners. Angel and Dennis have come very, very far from the party scene. Angel has clearly had a big effect on Dennis because during the long-form improv, we see Dennis in Angel's city. Much like the big mansion in his solo scene, Dennis's role in the long-form improv is pretty banal. He is an important businessman having to give a speech in front of a lot of people about the very vague nature of his job. It's a kind of comical scene in that way. Weirdly, Dennis is also going by a different name here, David Kensington. Maybe this shows just how unhappy he is with himself, like he feels like he has to entirely reinvent his identity to be satisfied. His speech is well received, and he mingles with the crowd speaking about his business, interacting with a John or two who continue to layer praise on top of him. Eventually he retires to his hotel. In the morning, Dennis leaves the hotel and Wade the janitor picks him up in his janitor outfit, acting as a chauffeur. Dennis doesn't recognize Wade, which is funny for reasons I'll get into later, but when they stop along the way to pick up John, Dennis recognizes John, though John calls him David. They break character a little. Dennis says about the class, "It's been great. I think I'm making progress." John thinks Dennis has potential and asks if he'd like to continue. Dennis says yes. So Wade the janitor drives Dennis and John out to John's house, and that's how Dennis arrives. Dennis is happy to see Rosie when they arrive, and is really ready to get on board for the continuation of the classes, loading himself into the van. But unlike before, Rosie not going isn't a deal breaker for Dennis. He says it's okay that she's not going, but that he's not giving up this opportunity. He isn't moved by Rosie bringing up his parents, his job, their bills, their marriage. He laughs and says that Rosie still doesn't understand. He gets in the van and leaves her behind to play big city businessman for the rest of his life. And why wouldn't he do that? This fantasy is a world where Dennis is taken seriously, where he is looked up to, where he has luxuries, where he can be alone with his thoughts and have no anxieties, no self-loathing, or at least fewer than before. So Rosie lost her husband to the acting class, but more importantly, more devastatingly, she also lost her side piece. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how else to transition between Dennis and Rayanne. Rayanne isn't Rosie's affair partner. Nothing ever actually happens between them, despite me really thinking it would the first time I read this book. Rayanne deserves a more elegant introduction. She is a very compelling character, so let's talk about her. Rayanne is vulnerable in a somewhat obvious manner. She's a single parent with a lack of support system. We first meet her through an inner monologue, or maybe a letter she wrote to her 3-year-old son Marcus. Let's break down what she tells him. Rayanne promises Marcus, "We're going to create something unique in this world." You sure are, guys. But seriously, I think Rayanne really relishes not necessarily her current bond with her son, but their potential bond. She hones in on the way that Marcus sees the world. When you're young, everything is meaningful. When you're old, everything is meaningless. And she says that adults can think but not feel, whereas children can feel but can't think. Rayanne hopes to find meaning again through being a mother to Marcus. She says that when he was a baby, she would talk and talk to him, and that he was her little therapist. Which is concerning language, because obviously you shouldn't be using your child as your therapist. but there isn't necessarily evidence in the rest of the book for Rayanne still using Marcus in that way now that he's older. I think this line says more about Rayanne not having an actual therapist, or just any friends or family to really connect with. Like most of the characters that we see, Rayanne is isolated and alone. She goes on about feeling anxious at the thought of Marcus growing up because she worries about how their relationship will turn out. Her relationship with her parents wasn't good, and they're not in her or her son's life. There is so much focus in this passage on Marcus's wonder and innocence, so it's kind of surprising when this scene ends with Marcus seeing a man in the corner of the room when there is nobody there. Maybe this is the first time that this has happened, we can't know because the scene cuts right after this, but I think it's possible that Rayanne just doesn't want to imagine that there's anything especially wrong with her son. And maybe there isn't. We see another scene later on where Marcus is being destructive while he and Rayanne play together, and then gets spooked saying that he saw more people in the house that weren't there. Something I do want to take from this is the emergent theme of ghosts, but I specifically want to talk about the word presence. Rayanne says that she is trying to learn about presence from her son. She wants to learn to be in the moment rather than constantly worrying about the past and the future of her and her son's life. This is the first time we hear the word presence in acting class, but we hear it again during the second class when John has the participants observe the janitor Wade while he cleans. John calls this a performance. This scene can be held in a new light when you know that Wade the janitor is a part of the cult, but anyway. John admires how natural Wade seems. There's no method in that, he says. Just pure presence. Presence means being present, but it's also a word people use in reference to ghosts or spirits. Like people say, I feel a presence in this room, you know? Rayanne's son is always seeing people that aren't really there. A presence. Remember when Danielle spoke about seeing a ghost growing up and not being taken seriously for it? Presence. And what metaphor did John use to refer to the long-form improvisation that acting class concludes with? A Ouija board. There is a huge recurring motif of ghosts in acting class. We're going to come across much more in the rest of this analysis. Like a doll or a figurine, a ghost is an impression of a person, and a ghost is a presence. I think that's what the whole ghost thing really is. It's a weird thread, but it makes much more sense when you read it under a more metaphorical lens. I hope some of that made sense, but if it didn't, don't worry. Let's talk about Rayanne again. To be clear, in no way am I judging Rayanne's parenting. She's already in a difficult position when we meet her, and she's dealing with it the best that she can. She doesn't always say the perfect thing, but who does? She's insecure about whether or not she's a good mother, which isn't unexpected given her predicament, and especially given how things continue to play out. Going back to Rayanne's isolation, we find out that the reason she joined the acting class in the first place was to meet people and make friends. Being a single parent has meant losing whatever social life that she might have had before, though I doubt there was much there in the first place. We find out later that Rayanne was raised out in the countryside where she felt isolated. If she had any friends there, she probably left them when she moved to the city. She has her aunt, who is the person who encouraged her to get out of the house in the first place and who babysits Marcus when Rayanne is at the classes. At the first class, Rayanne is honest and likeable when John has her take over the class for a minute and talk about herself. She says that she doesn't socialise much, but gets some laughs and is quick to be sincere, which John praises as spontaneous. However, during the party scene in the second class, John gives Rayanne her role. He tells her that child services took her son away the day before the party. He says it'll be a good exercise for her. During the party scene, Rayanne stews in this role, to the point that she breaks down over it and cries to Rosie. Rosie is baffled and angry at John for giving Rayanne the prompt in the first place, but Rayanne says that she's just glad the performance is over, and that it got her to worry that she is a bad mother, but she's fine now. So, yeah, that was really targeted coming from John. Like we said, Rayanne is pretty obviously vulnerable from the outset as a single mother lacking a support system, so John targeted that by having her imagine a version of things where her son is taken away from her, which is a parent's nightmare. Because of her vulnerability and her kind nature, and maybe because John gaslit her a bit like he did the others, Rayanne also lightly defends John and doesn't see the issue with him giving her that role. Next time we see Rayanne, she's playing with Marcus at home. Rayanne is trying to encourage Marcus to be gentle, but he's not having it. She discovers that he scribbled all over the pages of her favourite childhood book and tore pages out. Marcus then tricks Rayanne into letting him smash down the block tower they built. He then punches the couch and monster attacks Rayanne, biting her on the neck hard enough to leave a mark. While Rayanne is in the bathroom, Marcus runs to hide in the basement and says he saw them again. A big man, a mummy, and a little girl. Rayanne tries to reassure Marcus and take him upstairs, but he shouts that he hates her. I honestly don't know much about children as young as Marcus or what this kind of behaviour means about their development, but what we can take from this is that it's distressing to Rayanne. Of course it is, I too would be distressed. Particularly at the scribbling in my book thing, but I have weird priorities like that. Rayanne is clearly struggling to deal with Marcus's behaviour on her own. Coupled with Marcus's insistence on the presence in this house, which comes up again in this scene, I do think Rayanne has reason to be concerned. Rayanne's solo scene in the third class is fairly easy to analyse, so I won't dwell on it. Though what is interesting is that Rosie shows up in it. Much like Dennis appearing in Rosie's solo scene, I'm not sure how real this is. I do think it's most likely that Rayanne is just imagining Rosie as part of her scene for some comfort, which is nice. I painted Rosie and Rayanne's dynamic as an unrequited love thing, but I do think that Rayanne really treasures Rosie, just not necessarily in the same way that Rosie does for her. So in this scene, Rayanne has apparently asked Rosie to come over. She seems self-aware of the scenario not being real, but can't seem to leave the house. She checked on Marcus only to find that he is transformed into a massive green ogre. Rosie and Rayanne tried to act normal as to not scare him, but Marcus becomes upset and accidentally hurts Rosie. Rayanne cries and says she doesn't know what happened, but he's too big to fit through the door, and it's only a matter of time before he's too far gone. This is a pretty straightforward metaphor for Rayanne's fears about what her son might be turning into, and how she feels that she can't relate to or communicate with him, and how destructive he might become. After the participants leave the third class, we don't see Rayanne until the final class. Because the third class went so late and Rayanne's aunt was babysitting Marcus that night, the aunt refused to babysit him again and Rayanne couldn't get another sitter, so she brought Marcus with her. Rayanne implies to Rosie that she was worried she wouldn't see Rosie again and that's why she came back. Everyone is supportive of Rayanne bringing Marcus. Participants like Dennis and Gloria seem especially good with him. He even hugs Angel when she arrives. The only person he isn't receptive to is Rosie, which we covered already. Also, John calls Marcus a next-generation thespian, which I brushed off until right now. I'm just realising how sinister that sounds given the ending of this book. Rayanne sets Marcus up in the corner to keep himself busy during the class, but while she does a two-person improv scene with another participant, Beth, Marcus approaches and watches. This is particularly intense because I think Marcus watching affects the nature of the scene. Beth plays Rayanne's mother, a character who is a bit hot and cold, scolding Rayanne and then being affectionate with her, even picking her up. Rayanne plays along until she sees Marcus watching and then changes her tune. She wants to be let down, she wants space, she wants to express herself. Beth mentions Rayanne's father, and Rayanne reacts with anger. Beth leaves her in the room and punishes her, implying that she'll go without food. I wonder if this scene is close to home for Rayanne because this is what her upbringing was like, or maybe this is how she fears becoming with Marcus. I think the former is more likely. I also think Rayanne felt uncomfortable portraying herself with such vulnerability in front of her son. If she's playing a child, then they're both children. I think this is maybe what Rayanne fears in general for her relationship with Marcus, that there is no parent present because she doesn't know how to parent. I don't think this is entirely true, to be clear, but I think it's a worry Rayanne has that is exacerbated by the classes and by John. Marcus ends up taking part in the following exercise and also in the long-form improv, where John says that Marcus and Rayanne can play mother and son. As aforementioned in this world, Rayanne and Marcus live out in the countryside and Rosie joins them. What's interesting is that Rayanne grew up in a remote countryside location, but previously said that growing up there made her feel like she was going crazy, and that she wanted to raise Marcus in a different environment. But now when Rosie asks, Rayanne says that she loves it here, and that Marcus is like a new kid out here. Rayanne also seems fully bought into the scenario, saying that she doesn't have to tell Rosie what growing up was like, because she truly believes them to be sisters. Marcus seems happy, but becomes frightened by a figure haunting him, probably John. Marcus even says that he wants to go home, which I imagine isn't part of the act, though Rayanne seems to have forgotten about reality. This really shows, like, in moments where Rayanne leaves her 3-year-old son to interact with their dog, who is actually an adult man playing a dog. I know, we'll get to it. And when they go out to dinner and they're surrounded by a bunch of people, which Rayanne doesn't clock as weird. This culminates when the same John that Marcus was scared of appears in his and Rayanne's room as a monstrous figure. Marcus screams at the monster until it leaves. Rayanne hugs Marcus, telling him, "I'm so sorry I ever doubted you. I knew you could do it. I knew it." And she looks at Rosie, who has come in, and says, "See?" When Rosie says she thinks they should stop, Rayanne asks, "Stop what?" This was the moment that we really lost Rayanne. Later, in the van, with Marcus, who she takes with her, Rayanne is sad to realise that Rosie won't be joining her, and says that she'll miss her. But she's living in a whole new world now, one she prefers to the old. But why is this reality so much more appealing for her? The answer to that question really hinges on Marcus confronting the monster. For Rayanne and Marcus, that moment felt enormously cathartic. In this new reality, Marcus's troubles were real. There really was a monster or a ghost or whatever, and now it's gone. It is easier actually for Rayanne to believe that what Marcus was seeing was real. That way, the terror doesn't live solely inside of him. It can be dealt with externally. It can prove to her and him that he's not disturbed or crazy. He was right, and Rayanne is so sorry that she didn't see it before. This experience, John's influence, made the monsters real and in the same breath vanquished them. Why would Rayanne and Marcus want to leave the version of things where his problems no longer exist? Sometimes it's easier to deal with a world where monsters are real and killable, rather than a world where the monsters live in the minds of the ones you love. That being said, real monsters exist too. They're just better at hiding in plain sight. I think it's time we talk about Neil is the other participant besides Danielle who we're introduced to at the first class without any kind of preamble. Unlike Danielle, he doesn't introduce himself and just sits down without a word. During this class, when John asks Neil to get up and tell a story, Neil is awkward. It's clear that this is out of his comfort zone. Quickly he relents and says he can't do it. John thanks Neil and asks him how he feels, to which Neil admits to feeling frustrated. John reads Neil like a book, as John is wont to do, and guesses that Neil feels a little regretful about coming here, which Neil confirms. It's a kind of uncomfortable introduction to Neil, but Rosie and Dennis in the audience are supportive of him and the discomfort passes. When we finally meet Neil outside of the class, we pretty quickly learn his motivations from his inner monologue. He's taking the acting class to become better at community service, which he does with the community food pantry, going door to door requesting donations. He's taking the acting class to become better at community service, which he does with a community food pantry, going door to door requesting donations. We learn later that this is court-mandated community service. Neil's inner monologue is frantically self-conscious, fixated on performance of himself as a natural, likeable guy. A line from his thoughts that stood out to me was, "Don't do anything to arouse suspicion." Initially, I thought he might be running a scam, but we can disprove that based on the details from his inner monologue. Neil knocks on a door and recites the script, but the homeowner turns him down. After this exchange, Neil's inner monologue turns violent with anger against his perceived slight. He also... Okay, I wrote in my script that Neil is vaping in this scene because I misjudged the art. He's not vaping, he's drinking from a flask, which is less funny. Vaping as a concept is inherently goofier than day drinking in the street while you're doing court-appointed community service. Not funny, creepy. Anyway, Neil starts to imagine a character antithetical to himself, a fantasy of a man he wishes he was. He names this imaginary character Patrick, and what he imagines about Patrick tells us a lot about Neil's ideals and values, and also wider societal ones. One of the first things Neil says about Patrick is that he has a full head of curly hair. Neil is notably bald, which is fine. Sorry, I don't know why I thought that would be funny to say that. Neil is bald, and his baldness seems like a sore spot for him. A bald spot. I'm sorry. In a later acting class scene, he pretends to be going for a haircut and his idealized self has loss of hair. So this is a physical insecurity for Neil. Patrick also has blue eyes, he restores pianos for a job, he has a beautiful family, he raises chickens. Patrick just has an effect on people. Some people are just born with it. Perhaps most notably, Patrick doesn't drink and has no anger issues. If you didn't gather it from Neil pulling out a flask and day drinking earlier, Neil seems to have an alcohol problem. This is reiterated throughout the story. In the second class during the party scene, Neil breaks character with Danielle to offer her a drink from his flask. He might consider this a good move or a bonding thing, but it obviously doesn't go over well, and he winds up drinking by himself in the stairwell. During his dream scene in the third class, Neil takes the money he earned from his community service and takes it to go drinking. Maybe this is something he's done in real life too. Neil's anger issues, on the other hand, don't come up in an obvious way for some time besides his inner monologue, but we will get to his externalized anger later, believe me. We can see things working on Neil throughout the third class, like him not being sure if Angel's mental state is a part of the class or not, and his solo scene. Neil imagines himself as Patrick doing community work with a lot of success. It looks like a cartoon neighborhood with some colourful stars following him. He finds a wallet and returns it to its address, just being a good Samaritan. However, when Patrick catches his reflection, he sees Neil looking back at him. Neil in the reflection says, "This isn't me. I can't do this." He takes the money he collected and goes to a bar with it. This is fairly expected coming from Neil at this point. What's truly interesting and genuinely disturbing comes in the following week. We see Neil back at his community service, except he's going by the name and persona Patrick, and is having more success than usual, pleased with himself. Going door to door, Neil encounters a woman who recognizes him. Neil seems happy to see her, having lived in the same neighborhood as her when he was a teenager and babysat her children. When the woman finally speaks in earnest, she says, "Wendy has been in counseling. She told me what you did to her." Neil claims to not know what she means, but the woman goes on. She says she's imagined revenge on him. "But now, all I want to say is that I hope you know how much pain you've caused. I hope you never have another moment of peace again. I hope you rot in shame, in agony, for the rest of your life. Don't ever touch another kid again. She says that she's going to call the police when he leaves her door. Neil backs away and runs off, searching for Patrick in a shop window reflection. He finds him in a window and seeks reassurance. Patrick comes out with a bunch of lines. What's in the past is there for a reason. People make mistakes. The world is an unforgiving place. We all have our demons. You need to move on and forgive yourself. They don't know you. They're just trying to tear you down. Well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And Neil says he feels better. Everything Patrick said to Neil there, i.e. what Neil said to himself, are vague, tangentially related statements, all used to assuage himself of guilt over what he never denies, which is heavily implied to be sexually abusing a child. Of course, Neil could have done this to more than one child. I initially thought that that's what he'd been imprisoned for, but considering they have him on community service, I doubt that his former incarceration was related to CSA, which isn't to say that he isn't a repeat offender, just that he's probably not been caught for it. Anyway, the bottom line is, fuck this guy. This scene is horrible to come across, particularly how Neil separates himself from what he's done. You just know he's been repeating those mantras to himself for forever, so he doesn't have to reckon with the pain he's caused. And the acting class is only helping him with that by separating him from reality. Unfortunately, things do get worse. That should just be the tagline for this book. Neil attends the final class wearing a hat and glasses, clearly trying to disguise himself out of fear of being identified. When the class begins, he does a 2-person improv with Lou, where he pretends to be a guy with a full head of hair getting it all shaved off. The hair thing again. He wants to be the kind of person who is so casual about the things he has that he could get rid of them in a heartbeat. But even in this imaginary scene, he doesn't go through with the head shave. Moving on to the what you're saying makes me feel scene, Neil pairs with Gloria, and the two of them back themselves into a corner with the lack of conflict in their first scene. Neil says he wants to keep the exercise positive. Gloria ends up leaving, so Neil and Thomas pair up, where Neil tries the same premise, but Thomas makes it awkward. So it's interesting that he has that interaction with Thomas, because during the long-form improv, Neil arrests Thomas. That's right, arrests him, because Neil appears as a police officer. The anger issues we heard about earlier emerge here finally, when Neil is seen beating up and punishing Thomas. Obviously for Neil, who has been in trouble with the law before, this is a control fantasy. I also think, and this is a theory with not too much evidence, but bear with me, I think that Neil is semi to fully conscious of the reality of the situation, at least more than the other participants at this point. He mentions at one point to Thomas, "This is nothing compared to life upstate," which I think is referring to an upstate correctional facility. When Thomas asks what that's like, Neil hesitates and says he wouldn't know. I think he would know. There's a little bit of evidence to reveal that he's conscious enough in this scene to know what's real and what isn't. While Neil is beating Thomas up, the John police officer comes in and says, "It's time to go," and "It's a long drive." Neil knows what he means, which means that John probably spoke to Neil in a scene we didn't see. Neil takes Thomas with him. Neil begins the drive with Thomas to John's house. I think this happens in real life too, and that's how those two end up there. Neil won't tell Thomas where they're going. At one point, Neil drives past an area near where he grew up. "Lots of good memories," he says, which is sickening knowing what we know. When they arrive at John's house and see the rest of the group, Neil excuses Thomas's injuries as a part of the scene. However, when the immersion breaks for Rosie and she sees everything as it is, she still sees Thomas's injuries, which means that Neil really assaulted him. Not just that, but he did it in the room at the community center with everybody around and nobody realized. It's horrifying. This part really, made me feel ill the first time I read it. At the end, Neil boards the bus with everybody else. Actually, he boards the bus not just with a group of adults, but with 2 young children. Assumedly, the larger group they have wherever they're going has more children. A lot of cult and organised fringe groups tend to include children who grow up in the organisation and were brought into it by their vulnerable parents, like Rayanne. Neil will be among them, in a gated community, protected from his past, and free to enact his control, just like he always wanted. So, this cult is a bunch of men, women, children, and, do you think they have pets there? Maybe some dogs? Oh god, okay, we have to move on to...
How much is that doggy in the window? The one with the waggly tail.
Out of all 10 participants, Lou is the biggest enigma to me. I don't know what the hell is wrong with this guy. I'm kind of messing. After a lot of note-taking and thought, Lou's whole deal turned out to be a bit simpler than I initially thought. let's talk about him. The page that introduces us to Lou opens with an image of a mountainous, grassy landscape before shunting us right into a workplace staff room. A number of staff gather around a pile of cookies that their co-worker Lou left for them, with a note encouraging them to take one with a smiley face. There's no occasion, he just made cookies. Lou's co-workers seem suspicious of them. They imply that Lou could have ulterior motives with the cookies, or that they could even be poisoned. It feels insane to suspect that about your coworker unless they've done something to really warrant that suspicion. But the only context we get here is that one coworker cryptically justifies his hesitancy by claiming that Lou has many sides. Maybe he's a Gemini? I don't know. When we meet Lou, he seems fairly normal, if anxious to please, and is disappointed that nobody touches the cookies. Lou goes to the gym after work and sees a poster for the acting class. Aside from the whole implied sinister side to Lou, which, by the way, we never see come to fruition in an overt manner, we can take from this scene that Lou chooses to join acting class either to make friends or to become more likable. He wants to be loved, I think. Anyway, let's get to the real deal. During the second class, John assigns Lou a role for the party scene, and the role is a dog. He wants Lou to play the dog of the host of the party. John initially says, if you're comfortable, but then immediately gaslights Lou into doing it the minute he shows any discomfort. Lou goes along with it. When the artwork resembles a party, Lou suddenly resembles a dog. Lou the dog approaches Rosie on the couch, and she plays along and acts like he's a dog. I just wonder how much of what's happening is really happening. Is Rosie petting Lou's head? Is he licking her hand? Is he really curled up on the couch next to Dennis? I will say, the first time I read this, I was picturing Lou the man crawling around on all fours while he was playing the dog. I'm glad to say that it looks later like he's usually standing on 2 feet during these scenes, so at least there's that. Besides how creepy this all is, I want to hone in on what Rosie says to Lou the dog. She lathers him in attention and praises him as the life of the party. Give him some affection and he'll love you forever. I think this is exactly what real human Lou wants in his life. To be valued, to be loved, to be loyal. This may be the first time in a while, or in forever, that he's heard that sentiment directed at him. Unfortunately, it was while he was playing a dog. So what do you think that's going to do to his psyche? Over the coming weeks between classes, we get an odd scene. A girl has her friend over at her house when they hear odd noises coming from under the stairs. Barking and woofing. The girl whose house it is, Eva, tells her friend that it's a ghost, Old Man Lou, who lives under the stairs. Her dad comes in and tells her to stop scaring her friend before opening the door under the stairs. In there is Lou, who is having what this guy calls a night terror and is making dog-like noises in his sleep. So this is Lou's living situation. I can't say if the guy he's living with is his friend or his brother or some other relation, but whoever it is, he's living under their stairs, which... Lou has a job, as we saw earlier. I'm not saying that means he can afford rent or whatever because, recession, economic crisis, etc. But living under the stairs at someone else's house? Would it not be better to sleep on their couch? And why is he in there during the day, assumedly? So many questions that I really just don't have the answers to. Honestly, the fact that he's barking in his sleep is the least baffling thing to me about this situation. I might be making too much of it, though. Also, did you notice that girl called Lou a ghost? Presents. Listen. Disclaimer, I know that some people want to be dogs, and I don't blame them, to be honest. My dog does fuck all day besides get huge amounts of attention, sleep in the sun, eat all our leftovers, and sulk when I won't let her run into traffic. I too would like to be her. This isn't a furry hate campaign is what I mean. If Lou just joined the furry community, I would be delighted for him. I also know that that's not what a furry is, by the way, I'm messing. Unfortunately, something like that is not what is happening here, and things do get worse. Let's talk about Lou's solo scene during the third class. We see Lou as a dog again, the same kind of dog he resembled in the party scene last class. He's running in a beautiful flowery field. He drinks from a stream, wanders with cows, content and free. His owner, a guy that we haven't seen before, calls Lou back to the house, which heavily resembles the house the participants are really in right now, John's house. Inside, Lou's owner eats dinner and feeds and plays with Lou, before sitting out on the porch and then going to bed with Lou by his side. In the morning, Lou's owner drives Lou to a facility and leaves him there. Lou is kept in a pen with lots of other dogs until he is pulled out. He is butchered and turned into canned food with his name and face on it. His owner picks a can of Lou up from the shop and eats it for dinner. This was the solo scene that made me feel sick, and it still upsets me. Obviously it's ridiculous and bizarre, but the art is quite distressing. Even though it never shows the actual butchering, Lou's little face and the contrast with the life he had the day before, it's just so fucked up. But okay, now I have to analyze this scene. So obviously Lou is still in dog mode, but he's not able to imagine himself as a happy dog with a free life. His mind goes to this absurd, horrible place. With this being a glimpse into Lou's psyche, this could reflect a kind of anxiety and violent imagination that he holds in him. But going deeper than that, I think this might represent what Lou thinks of interpersonal relationships or of loving relationships, specifically his role in those dynamics. Dogs are represented as loving and trusting their humans unconditionally. I think that Lou the dog in this situation probably still loved and trusted his owner even after this intense betrayal, and I think the owner eating Lou at the end is like Lou saying, "Look, this is what love is. Eating your canned dog after you send them off to be slaughtered." What the fuck is this book? During the week that follows, we see Lou's routine. At the gym, at work where he refuses help or a break. Later, he sees some deer and chases them, woofing. So, for the final class, Lou is the first to show up, probably because he's eager to get back into dog mode. Sorry, I keep calling it that. I don't know what else to say. Another participant, Thomas, arrives and they chat. Oddly, Lou asks Thomas if he can get a ride home. He says he got a lift here from a friend. When asked how he feels about the class, Lou says he feels more or less the same and that he keeps coming back because it's just something to do, which we know is a lie. Unless he was feeling all of this dog stuff before, which, based on his initial reaction to the role John gave him in the first class, I doubt. When Thomas asks Lou what happened during a solo scene, Lou says he doesn't really remember and thinks he fell asleep. I don't know if I believe this either, but I do believe what he says next, which is, "I was happy. I remember that." The only implication of violence with Lou, besides his introduction, comes in a two-person improv scene he does with Neil during the final class. Lou plays a barber to Neil, who plays the customer. Neil the customer is a bit rude, to which Lou recites his character's inner monologue. This inner monologue covers his irritation with the repetitive complaints he gets at work. This could be true to his own life. Lou fantasizes about killing Neil and ending it all right now. This is the first instance of desire for violence that we've seen perpetrated by Lou in any scenario, besides maybe the dog meat dream, though I think that was different. It was self-inflicted. Lou doesn't know how long he can keep this up, this facade of peace. The fact that he has the option to lash out soothes him. The scene ends. Next up, during the "What You're Saying Makes Me Feel" scene, Lou is paired with Danielle, who plays a dying person. Lou says he feels torn up inside, pained, panicked, and towards the end he breaks the format of the game by begging Danielle to stay with him. Like I said in Danielle's section, this is an emotionally heavy scene, and I think it gets to Lou a fair bit. I also think he probably likes the idea of being at somebody's side while they're dying, like being that important to somebody, and someone being that important to him. He gets this wish once again in the long-form improv, where he appears as and is accepted as Lou the dog, belonging to Rayanne, Marcus, and Rosie. We see them all, including Marcus, interact with him as their dog. And John reinforces this. He pets Lou, calls him beautiful, and figures that Lou's owner must love him to death, which is interesting phrasing considering Lou's solo scene from earlier, where he was in fact loved to death. So, until he boarded the van at the end and was whisked away with the class, Lou lived under the stairs in someone's house and had to be brought to the acting class, maybe by the guy he lived with, and had to get a lift back too. He lives for praise and love from other people, and allegedly has many sides to him, where maybe one side of him desires to be violent or lash out and hurt people, though we don't really have clarification on that. All I can say about that is, it kind of sounds like the way a dog behaves. Lou's got that dog in him, I guess. You know who else has that dog in him? That's not even an accurate statement, but I can't think of another way to transition into I think Thomas's arc might be my favourite out of everyone's because of how different it is. When we meet Thomas, we learn he's a nude model who's been working in his field for years. He seems confident and comfortable in his body. He says the modelling feels good. He's actually the one to recommend the acting class to Gloria and Beth, two other characters who we'll discuss soon. He was recommended it by a friend of a friend. This shows a kind of spontaneity to Thomas's character that opposes the kind of anxiety we see in a character like Angel. Thomas is, like the rest of the group, a social misfit, but his individuality and floating through life manner grants him a sense of freedom and fulfillment. So, what does John Smith do when he realizes that Thomas is already comfortable in himself? He starts to sow insecurity into him. Thomas's first performance during the first class involved Danielle acting as his boss and firing him. The first time they play through this, Thomas lashes out in character and cuts the scene short with an outburst. John points this out and has the two of them replay the scene with what Thomas would have been like in that situation, not playing out what he wanted to happen. This scene comes across as much more realistic, and John is delighted, praising Thomas's transformation. As innocuous as this moment seems, knowing who John is and where his intent lies, we can read it with some suspicion. Despite identifying himself as nervous earlier, Thomas offers to come up and do a scene with Danielle, showing John that he has some confidence. Following that, his initial performance in the scene might not display mature instincts, but it does show that Thomas is willing to be a big presence. There's that word again. John knocks that confidence down in a subtle way. He makes Thomas pull from a time where he was really fired, causing him to relive this painful memory. I know that sounds dramatic, but I really do think that John, who we've established is able to read people with the drop of a hat, clocked Thomas as a confident, comfortable person and immediately began to knock that confidence. John started off small with Thomas, but things become a little more uncomfortable in the second class. While handing out roles to the participants for the party scene, John pulls Thomas aside to give him his secret role. He tells Thomas, "You are a liar and a thief. You are very charming among the guests, but your only ambition is to get one over on people. You have to act on these impulses and not get caught." John exclusively using the you pronoun to instruct the participants, rather than saying, "you'll be playing this role," is definitely intentional. Thomas voices that he's reluctant to play this role, but John dismisses his trepidation the same way he dismissed Lou when Lou was uncomfortable with his role. The way Thomas handles his role is interesting, to say the least. During the party scene, he approaches Rosie and breaks character, talking about the last class and how he loved her performance, initially dismissing John's authority. Thomas goes on to ask an icebreaker at the party. He says, "If you had to kill someone, would you do it?" We're going to talk about the relevant responses to this in a bit, but I won't dwell on it with Thomas specifically. I just want you to remember that he asked this question. Later in the party scene, Thomas sees John watching and feels a bit of pressure to enact the thievery part of his role. He pretends to get up and leave and go through the host of the party's room, but actually just goes through everyone's things on a table in the room they're really in. Gloria, another participant, catches Thomas, breaking the illusion and breaking Thomas's character. He tries to explain the role he was given and apologizes. Gloria says, "Why are you apologizing if it's just a performance?" I think this kind of moment is exactly what John was hoping for, and it certainly gets to Thomas. He goes on with his week afterwards, but we see him during the modelling class that Gloria and Beth attend, and he seems nervous. This interpersonal and internal conflict is now affecting his line of work. Next up is the third class, where Thomas has his solo scene, which is the final and I think longest of the solo scenes we see. Thomas is in a police interview, initially believing he's being interviewed as a witness of something, but soon finding out that he's the suspect. He's accused of kidnapping a disabled man named George Arturo, who frequents the campus Thomas works at. Witnesses, including Gloria and Beth, claim to have seen George Arturo in Thomas's car, and the police found Arturo's backpack in the boot of Thomas's car. The detective also brings up exercises from the acting class, like the party scene, as though that really happened, and what Thomas did at the party was real. They also say that John incriminated him. When Thomas claims it was just an acting exercise, the detective says, "This isn't acting, this is real life." Thomas is genuinely horrified by all these accusations and swears he is a good person, to which the detective says, "Keep telling yourself that." Thomas is completely immersed by this scene and begins to spiral. His own subconscious challenges this perception of himself, and he doesn't know what to believe anymore. When everyone is waking up, Danielle appears in Thomas's scenario to pull him out, but it takes a moment for him to come out of it. In the week that follows, Thomas is really off his game. He's overcome by paranoia and uncertainty over what's real and what isn't. During the class he's modelling for, he talks to the teacher, who is actually the detective from his solo scene. Clearly that's where he got the image of her from. He tells her he feels uncomfortable with taking his clothes off for the modelling, unable to explain himself further than that. The teacher isn't happy about this, and warns Thomas that if he doesn't snap out of it by next week, then they'll have to get a different model. Thomas's clothed poses for the art class are awkward and uncomfortable to look at. He's on all fours, then he has his arms in the air and his head back like he's in surrender, and he also is sweating a lot. Thomas arrives early to the final class because he wants to talk to John, but ends up talking to Lou instead. He admits the following to Lou when they talk about the effects of the class. "I feel worse. I don't know what's wrong with me. I was doing fine before I started the classes. Now I'm just confused." Thomas rambles a bunch to Lou, wondering if the way the class changed him is actually a good thing, but the examples he gives are dreadful. He says he's been waking in a panic thinking he's done something horrible and getting into the habit of looking out for police cars or even crossing the street when a nice-looking family pass him. If this alone doesn't sound like John has broken Thomas's formerly confident, comfortable state of being, then it becomes even clearer when Thomas panics that Lou is perceiving him badly and apologizes. Thomas's anxious, paranoid energy reminds me a bit of how Angel started out. John brought this out of Thomas in the span of only 4 weeks. When the final class begins, John tests Thomas's state of being by having him do an introduction exercise where he introduces himself and has to be honest and dig deep. I'm saying this is a test because, well, it's John, but also because John had Danielle do this too. I think he's checking in on the two characters who started out with the most confident and normal lives. In his speech, Thomas says that he had problems keeping up with the class in grade school and had trouble fitting in, and fantasized about moving away. It seems like Thomas, growing up, must have had to do a lot of work to become the confident and charming person he was until recently, but John saw through him all the way back to the little boy who didn't fit in school. Next up, we have the "what you say makes me feel" exercise. Thomas is left without a partner, so John partners with him. Fucking great. Thomas doesn't seem overjoyed about this, but goes along with it. During the exercise, John continues his fear-mongering of Thomas in a way that seems extremely real, at least to Thomas. John says, "I'm afraid of you. I feel that there's something evil inside of you." And Thomas refutes this with an expression of shock. This goes on for a while, but a few noteworthy moments are John saying, "I've never set out to hurt anyone in my entire life, and I resent the accusation," and Thomas saying he feels a deep and profound despair. When they finish, John goes back to behaving normally and praises Thomas, calling this his strongest performance yet, by which he implies that this is a strong aspect of Thomas, again trying to convince him that he is a bad person. I think this was Thomas's strongest performance because he's genuinely so distressed by what's been happening, and because he is becoming convinced of the bullshit John is feeding him. Finally, Thomas enters the long-form improv. In it, he wanders alone through a town where he gets a motel for a night. He spends some time before he goes to bed in a bar where there are several people, but only one interacts with Thomas, who we can assume is a John. He calls himself Stu Neely. Stu is clearly instigating something in Thomas, even picking on him for being out of place, which is what Thomas feared as a child. Their interactions are stiff and awkward. Later, Thomas goes to bed in his motel room, and Stu enters the room and threatens Thomas, to which Thomas starts off as compliant and afraid. Stu grabs and starts to choke Thomas. In self-defense, Thomas hits Stu with the motel room phone and then strangles him to death. Notably, Thomas wills himself to wake up. This could mean he's so immersed in the scene that he's forgotten it's not real, or that he kind of knows it's not real but can't seem to break out of it. Both are very possible. Thomas makes a break for it but is caught by Neil, the police officer. So, as we know, Neil subjects Thomas to police brutality and other forms of corrupt police work, as does one of the Johns, who appears also as a cop. Thomas is humiliated by Neil and repeatedly put down and made to feel hopeless. It is horrific to read. As we also know, Neil drives Thomas out to John's house, acting in the roles of cop and prisoner the whole time. When they arrive, Thomas is relieved to see everyone, but Neil doesn't free him. Thomas is not actually handcuffed, though he seems to believe that he is. Thomas has been landed in the mindset of a prisoner manipulated by a corrupt justice system. Despite protests he may give, Thomas believes he deserves to be in this situation. He believes he killed somebody. Now he can answer his own icebreaker question. If you had to kill someone, would you? And how would you do it? I didn't mention this, but there was another participant who was involved in the icebreaker conversation back during the party scene who was reluctant to answer that question and was horrified when somebody else answered it in graphic detail. Her name is Gloria. Gloria is an old woman who lives with her adult granddaughter, Beth. When we first meet them, they're at an art class, the same one Thomas models for. Gloria comes across a little overbearing with Beth, who is quiet during the lesson. Gloria speaks for her a lot. I remember feeling a bit irritated by this the first time I read acting class. I found Gloria somewhat condescending, but it was nothing egregious. However, as acting class proceeded, Gloria became one of my favourite characters, and one of the characters I empathised the most with. Like Rosie, I think she's sharply intelligent and aware. She makes little comments throughout the book, particularly directed at John, that might hint to her seeing through his bullshit. In the second class, when John says he likes to imagine the lives of the people he observes while observing Wade the janitor, Gloria says, "You can go downstairs right now and ask him." Okay, Gloria. In fairness, we don't know the tone that she says this in. I think it could be lighthearted. Doesn't mean she's not making a point though. Side note, John's response is creepy as fuck. He says, "When he's behind the glass, he is what I decide he is." I hate this man. Shortly after, when John labels the participants as social misfits, Gloria objects. I don't think Gloria ever really buys what John is selling her, and yet she's willing to go along with it until the last class. Why? For Beth. It wasn't wrong to think that Gloria is overprotective with Beth, but we find out that this attitude is not unfounded. There's a reason Gloria was particularly defensive about the group being called social misfits. It wasn't for her own sake, but for Beth's. During the party scene, we learned some Gloria lore. Gloria, inhabiting the role of a landlady, tells a tenant horror story. She says that a tenant named Sam believed the place was haunted and used a medium who manipulated her. The medium told Sam that the spirits would attach themselves to her even after she moved out. Sam began to think that Gloria had known all along and that she had supernatural powers over the house. Sam even tried to sue Gloria for pain and suffering, and harassed her and said she was still being haunted by demons, begging her to call them off. Another instance of presence, right? Later we learned that this is a true story, but Sam wasn't a tenant of Gloria's. She was Gloria's sister. We learn more about this in the third class out in John's house. Gloria is even more wary than before, and she seems more concerned about Beth too. When Angel shows up and asks where the bathroom is, Gloria shows her the way. She has an idea where the bathroom is because John's house is the exact same layout as her uncle's old place. She says it even feels the same. Bizarrely, when she sees the bathroom, the lamp in there is the same and is in the same place as it was in her uncle's house. Gloria says about her uncle's house, it wasn't a very happy place. I'd forgotten a lot of things about it. So it seems like the house is jogging her memory. I can't explain why the house is so similar to Gloria's uncle's house. I can't figure that out. If anyone has theories of their own, let me know in the comments. I'm chalking it up to a coincidence. Gloria stops by a bedroom where a little girl is drawing and has a chat with her. The girl says that she's drawing some houses because she'd like to make a town someday. Then a woman, assumedly the girl's mother, arrives annoyed and tells Gloria that John's guests are supposed to stay in front of the house. Gloria apologizes and says that John didn't mention that, and Gloria says she thought that this was John's house, but this is where we learn that John is just staying on the property. The woman gets a sudden migraine and goes to lie down. Shortly after, Gloria meets Wade the janitor in the kitchen. She doesn't recognize him at first, which shifts his formerly unremarkable demeanor. He seems sad that Gloria didn't remember him, though she insists that she just didn't recognize him out of his janitor uniform. Wade says, John has been trying to help me make a stronger impression on people. I guess I still need some work. Now, we have the foresight of knowing that Wade is in the same cult as John and maybe was a former participant in one of his classes, so we can assume that this insecurity is how John trapped him. Anyway, in this conversation, Gloria also mentions Wade's wife, the woman with the migraine, but Wade says that that wasn't his wife. This whole part with the mother and daughter and them living with Wade the janitor but not explaining who they are just really baffled me. I was ready to write in the script that I didn't have a proper theory for what place this had in the narrative because I was under the impression that these characters never come up again. Part of me thought they were ghosts because anything could fucking happen in this book. But as I was writing this out, I thought I might as well check something really quick, though it probably won't result in anything. Do you remember that at the end of acting class, it's revealed that John has another class he teaches during the week, and he introduces the Friday and Wednesday classes to each other before they drive away in the big van? I went back to look at the Friday morning class, and what do you know, there's the mother and daughter from John's house. The mother's attitude seems completely different. Back during the third class, I thought she seemed irritated, and I didn't get the impression that she liked John much. I also wonder if her migraines were a symptom of something that the class had caused in her, or if she sought relief for her migraines from the classes. Not that that would work, but John is very convincing. Sorry for that aside, but I was so relieved to have somewhat solved that little mystery. Maybe it's obvious to other people, but I was really confused by it. Anyway, moving back to the topic of Gloria's sister, during a conversation between Gloria and Danielle in the kitchen, we get the clarification that the story about the bad tenant was in fact about Gloria's sister Sam. Sam had a baby that Gloria raised herself after Sam went into a facility due to her mental decline. However, Sam's child also wound up with troubles and entered a facility. Gloria now takes care of Sam's granddaughter, Beth. So Gloria is actually Beth's great aunt, and whatever troubles Sam had seemed to run in the family. Shortly after this, we get Gloria's solo scene. We see Gloria hiding in a bathroom in a memory of her uncle's house. We can see the same lamp hanging there. The scene seems to repeat a particular memory from when Gloria was a child, though Gloria appears as her current self. Her sister Samantha hides in the bathroom with her. They hide while their father and Uncle Bob fight outside and then come into the house. It sounds like a physical altercation takes place, though we don't see anything. Their uncle threatens them through the door to get out of the house, but their mom comes back to get Gloria and Sam, though notably Sam hangs back. This version of her, the one in Gloria's memory, never really left this bathroom. She's preserved here as an innocent child, just as Gloria's sister. I think this scene could be evidence that Gloria's uncle, or maybe even her father, had the same mental troubles that Sam eventually had, and that was passed down through the family. There's no strong evidence for this, of course, but I think that the altercation and also the uncle telling the children to get out of the house is a side of definitely some unrest, and maybe even some paranoia, because why are you telling children to get out of the house? Anyway, just a theory. In the week that follows this class, we find out that Gloria is actually aware that Beth's mental condition is deteriorating. We see Beth having a psychotic episode. Like I stated at the beginning of this video, I'm no expert in mental illness, and I want to qualify that by stating I have no personal experience with psychosis in any form. According to the HSE and NHS, the main symptoms of psychosis are hallucinations, delusions, disordered and disturbed thoughts and speech, and disruptive behaviour. In this scene, we see Beth experiencing what are the closest to disordered thoughts, identifiable by her rapid and nonsensical speech. She switches up topics mid-sentence and becomes distressed. According to Gloria's response, this isn't the first time this has happened, and she mentions Rebecca, who is maybe a therapist or a doctor they've been seeing. Gloria sits and talks with Beth, trying to ground her and help her through the episode, probably on the advice of a doctor. From the research I did, she's got the right idea, like remaining calm and respectful, asking how she can help, and not taking things personally. Gloria also might know how to do this just because she's been through this before with Beth's mother and with her own sister. Later, Gloria speaks on the phone to a doctor saying that tonight's episode was particularly bad, lasting a few hours, and that it's become more frequent. But Gloria notes that things have exacerbated for Beth after last week's class. Unfortunately, they won't be able to get another doctor's appointment until after the final acting class. Speaking of the final class, Gloria and Beth attend. As they approach the community centre, Gloria says to Beth that they don't have to go. Beth, however, says she's been looking forward to the class all week and that she loves it. Interestingly, she says, "I thought this is what you wanted." Gloria replies, "We're not doing this for me. All of this is to help you." To me, this is one of the most tragic lines in the book. Gloria has spent most of her life as a carer. We don't get to see any glimpse of her life outside of what she does for Beth. She said, "All of this is to help you." One piece of advice I came across in my research on helping someone through psychosis is to get help yourself. I don't know if Gloria has done that. I think she's probably spent so long not taking things personally that she's left no room for the personal. That happens with carers. I also think there's a broken line of communication between Gloria and Beth here, especially when Beth says, "I thought this is what you wanted." Do they both think they're doing all this for the other person? As usual, things get worse. In the final class, Gloria and Rosie do a two-person improv, where Gloria essentially plays out her worries about having to send Beth away, or she could be repeating a memory, as we've seen her do before, of writing to either her sister or niece in recovery. Gloria cuts the scene off herself by asking, "Is that a scene?" Good question, Gloria, is it? John says he has nothing but praise. Beth doesn't say anything, but I wonder what she thinks, having to watch Gloria play out something so intimate to both their lives. Soon into the following exercise, Gloria breaks away to speak with John, asking if they can talk candidly. She explains Beth's situation to John and says that they won't be continuing the classes. John says, "I certainly want what's best for Beth, but look at her now. She's happy. Maybe something about this experience is working." Clearly, he is brushing aside not just Gloria, but also Beth's doctor's concerns about the destabilizing environment. To her credit, Gloria is firm about not continuing the classes, but John manages to convince her to stay until the end of this class. The participants enter the long-form improv after this. Gloria appears in the same grayscale town as Danielle. She lurks around until nightfall, where she finds Beth working at a cleaner's. Gloria is clearly trying to strike up a scene with Beth, but it seems like Beth doesn't know her and is even a little cold to her. Gloria follows Beth to her apartment, where Beth is going on a date with a John. Gloria gets found out and kicked out, scaring Beth, who insists that she doesn't know this lady. The John plays along, and Gloria is left feeling lost. About here is where she runs into Danielle. I covered this in Danielle's section, but Gloria and Danielle are both confused about their situations. Gloria says that Beth doesn't recognize her and was with some man, to which Danielle says, obviously that must be John. Deciding to leave the class and take Beth with them, Gloria and Danielle find Beth's apartment and try to get through to her. It's only when Gloria threatens to call the police that the scenery breaks and we see the basement once again, and John kicks Gloria, Danielle, and Beth out. But Beth... Let's finally talk about Like with most of acting class's characters, it's hard to read Beth. If you look closely, Beth's face is perhaps the most still of all the characters. Her mouth hardly opens when she speaks, and there's not much variation in her expression. It's easy to interpret her as shy or reserved right away, though there's evidence against this when she makes a joke about finding the nude model attractive, and also when, during the first acting class, she doesn't put up her hand when John asks who is nervous. So then we think, maybe she's just chill like that. Even in the first class, during a warm-up exercise, John calls Beth very composed. Beth is described by Gloria as a little sponge. What Gloria means here is that Beth is multi-talented and curious, which is implied to be one of the reasons they attend the acting class in the first place. However, a more apt attribution to calling Beth a sponge is her vulnerability. A sponge soaks everything up. During the party scene is where we first see the cracks start to show, though it's subtle. Playing the host of the party, Beth is the first one to get into character and plays her role with enthusiasm, which is surprising from what we know of her at this point. It's mostly Beth's engagement with the other participants during this scene that raise the first hints of what's going on with her. Notably when Gloria tells the story about her tenant, really about her sister, Beth's biological grandmother, being haunted by demons, Beth says she's never seen anything like that in the building. When Thomas asks, if you had to kill someone, would you do it? And if you did, how would you do it? Beth's answers are notable. She asks, will we get in trouble? Which I think is a bit childlike. When asked how she'd do it, Beth says, I'd cut their face off and wear it as a mask while I killed them so they could watch their own death. Get it? I want to be careful about painting Beth as dangerous. That's a harmful stereotype about mental illness in general. In particular, people who suffer with psychosis and dissociative disorders are often portrayed in films as villains, especially in horror. Think of Psycho or Split or lots of episodes of Criminal Minds. I think that Beth's struggle with her mental health in acting class is far more nuanced than what we've become used to in horror media. That was a scary thing she just said, yes. But to be clear, Beth never harms anybody in this story. She never even tries to. People who experience psychosis and psychotic episodes are at a more severe risk of self-harm and suicide, so I think any moments of violence that Beth brings up are more reflective of that. There's also evidence for Beth being at risk to herself and experiencing self-hatred, which we can talk about now. Gloria and Beth attend the third class out in John's house. On the way there in the car, Beth keeps laughing to herself, which worries Gloria. Eventually, Gloria asks, what's going on in your mind? Beth just says it would take too long to explain. Luckily for us, we are ushered through a direct door to Beth's mind later that evening during her solo scene. In this scene, Beth sits at a table in a dimly lit room, playing Russian roulette with herself. Literally, there are two Beths at the table. One of the Beths is wearing a blue dress that she's pictured wearing that evening, and the other wears red. Red Beth claims to be unafraid of losing the game. Blue Beth seems happy when Red Beth has to play and says, I'll get you eventually. Red Beth asks, what made you choose this scenario? Blue Beth says, I could ask you the same question. I'm not gonna lie. This scene scared the shit out of me when I saw it first, largely because I had not guessed that this was what Beth's scene would look like. It was a shock, and it's supposed to be, because a lot of the time when somebody has thoughts like this and is suffering in some kind of way, other people would never notice or understand. This scene still freaks me out. The imagery is very disturbing, from Beth's expressions to the reveal of the gun, to the subtle but childlike decor of the room they're playing in. But now, more than anything, it makes me sad for Beth. I spoke about Beth's potential self-loathing and suicidal ideation, which we can see plainly here, because even though Red and Blue Beth act slightly differently, I think the only real difference is that Red Beth doesn't flinch when she pulls the trigger, whereas Blue Beth does. But really, they're both the same person, and they both want the other, themselves, dead. Like I inferred before, Beth is more at risk to herself than to anybody else. I said before that Lou's solo scene made me feel sick, but Beth's scene stuck with me and was the first reason that I began to love this book. Like I mentioned in Gloria's section, Beth's mental health worsens rapidly after this class. For somebody who might be experiencing delusions or hallucinations, what John is teaching could be especially damaging. However, Beth says to Gloria on the way to the final class that she's been looking forward to the acting class all week and that she feels great, so there must be something she gets out of it that she enjoys. I think it's the opportunity to escape reality, not just in terms of the scenarios, but also because nobody at the acting class knows about Beth's mental illness. However, there is a loneliness in that too. Before they go in, Beth says, "Come on, Granny, I want to see what happens next." Interesting phrasing. It's almost meta. Before the final class begins, Beth says that she can feel a glow around both Dennis and Rosie. This could just be a metaphor, which is how the others take it, but it could also be part of her hallucinations. When the exercises begin, Beth does a two-person improv scene with Rayanne, which we've covered already, but to remind you, Beth plays Rayanne's mother. This scene tells us a lot about Rayanne, but it tells us a bit about Beth too. Beth has been treated as childlike or vulnerable a lot during this novel. I do think she's a bit immature, so her picking on the role of mother shows her desire to break out of that box, even if the mother figure is quite toxic. Moving on to Beth's "What You're Saying Makes Me Feel" scene, Beth is actually paired with Marcus, Rayanne's 3-year-old son. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that I believe Rayanne and Marcus are parallels to Gloria and Beth. Their arcs end in opposite places, but share a lot of commonalities. I'm actually going to break this interaction down a lot more than I have the others because of how insightful and interesting it is. Beth and Marcus approach this exercise with much more creativity than any of the other participants. Their feelings are far more abstract. I'm going to talk about pretty much all of Beth's comments on her end of the conversation, so buckle up. She starts by saying that she feels like a wall that needs to be painted. This can be interpreted as blank, waiting, and full of potential, though that potential depends on others and not on her. She can't paint herself. This could also be a reference to the painting classes that Beth and Gloria have been taking. Next, Beth says that she feels like a bowl of rotten fruit. This is a disturbing image. It depicts something dying and sickening, and something that humans find particularly revolting, something that is bad for living things. Next is one I find even more upsetting. Beth feels warm and fuzzy, like a teddy bear burning in hell. This is a clever line with the double entendre of warm and fuzzy, considering the teddy bear's predicament. But why would a teddy bear be in hell? Is that how Beth feels? And with the warm and fuzzy element, does it feel good to her, like the Russian roulette might have? This could also represent a death of innocence. Next is the one that makes me the saddest. Beth says that she feels like a grand piano no one knows how to play. A grand piano is beautiful, magnificent, and again full of creative potential that depends on other people. But nobody can reach this potential, not because they don't want to. It's not a piano no one wants to play, but that no one knows how to play, which makes it useless. This gives us so much insight into Beth. She feels isolated in her condition. She can't communicate even with those closest to her, because Gloria, despite all of her effort, can't understand what Beth is experiencing. What's ironic is that to this, Marcus replies that he feels like, "I'm 100 years old, I'm so bored to death." Just like Beth expressed, Marcus doesn't understand what he's saying. Marcus is 3 years old, so I'm not blaming him for this, of course, but I still find it sad. Next, maybe because she's frustrated by this child not understanding her, Beth says she feels like a monster hiding under your bed, which is sinister and targeted at Marcus, a child. When Marcus lashes out in anger in response, Beth says she feels like a babysitter. The game ends after that. If things weren't bad enough before, then don't worry, they're about to be. During the long-form improv, Beth is pictured with an ordinary life. She works at a cleaner's and lives independently in an apartment, and even has a date in the form of a John. I think for a lot of people who need carers and struggle with their health, mental or physical, the idea of living like this really is a fantasy. This is a world where nobody struggles to understand Beth. When Gloria and Danielle come in to disrupt the scene, Beth is completely immersed. Even when John breaks character and kicks them all out, Beth still sees everything the way it was before. She's calling John by a different name, she's panicked, frightened at being dragged away, and she is crying out for help. I have to confess something. Earlier when I summarized acting class for your convenience, I left something out. The epilogue. We don't end the book on Rosie hiding in a bush. We ended on Beth in a psychiatric ward. We see Beth trying to get another patient to invest in an opportunity. This could be related to the class, but it could just as likely be a delusion of Beth's. A nurse takes the other patient away, inferring that Beth talks about this kind of thing a lot. The nurse says that Gloria, who is supposed to be coming in, won't be calling in because of the weather, but that she'll try to come in the following days. Beth says, "I'll be waiting right here." She looks out the window, and through it sees those same colourful stars that have been following our participants all throughout acting class. In the end, Beth got out, but she never stopped seeing stars. And that's acting class, guys. Woo! Nick Drnaso has quickly become one of my favourite graphic novelists working today. His work exactly captures what life can feel like right now, and it's sad that a work of psychological cult horror is what does that, but that's how it feels to me. His intent goes far beyond trying to get a cheap scare out of the reader. He is an author and artist who operates with empathy and depth. That's why this video was so long. There was so much in it. I had to leave stuff out. I had to make some cuts from points I wanted to make. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it served as more than just a summary, because that's not what I wanted to do at all. If you have theories of your own, whether you've read the book, which you should, or just from what I covered in this video, please comment about it. A lot of what I said in this video is my interpretation. There are so many angles the story provides. Also, famed horror director Ari Aster will be adapting acting class to film, so watch out for that. Ari Aster, if you're watching this, do a good job, please. And if it's true that Emma Stone is in it, I hope she's playing Rosie. I think that'd be good casting. Thank you so much for watching my first video essay. Subscribe if you want more. I will be making more, though I don't know if I'll make one this comprehensive next. I might cover something that won't take this long to talk about. Something about women being on fire, maybe. If you do want my opinions on books and movies, follow me on Goodreads at Nellie Warren and Letterboxd at Nellie is not cool. I'm also on Instagram by that name. Slongafol.